Chapter 165. The moment Ning Chen and Underworld Child clashed, Ghost Girl and Yu Yu also stepped forward and started fighting. The battle between the four of them immediately turned incandescent. Every move was merciless and aimed directly at the vital points, full of murderous intent. Facing Underworld Child, Ning Chen could no longer hold back. He unleashed all of his skills. The moment his sword moved, it caused a snowstorm that filled the sky. Both sides had no more leeway. Between the strong moves, there was only an exchange of injuries. Although Ning Chen was not at his peak state, he had 2 heavenly books and an immortal body created by the Yellow Springs flower. He was not at a disadvantage at all. The 4 of them were not normal people. 2 of them were from the underworld. One was a living dead, and the other was a living puppet. Sword moves and palm attacks landed on their bodies, causing blood to splatter. However, it was an even more intense battle. There was no hatred or resentment. Between the 4 of them, it was far from the hatred of life and death. However, every move was fatal and merciless. At this time, there were not many wise. Just like Underworld Child who had lost his mind, any actions that were not accepted by the world might be because of a momentary thought. Ning Chen would not explain anything. Before confirming whether the heavenly book inside was the void scroll, he would not be courteous to anyone. The 4 of them fought fiercely. As the sword and palm clashed, their injuries became more and more serious. However, no one fell. Even if the sword chi penetrated their bodies and the palm attacks pierced their hearts, there was no other injury except for the blood flowing from the corner of their mouths. Among the 4 of them, Yu Yu was the one with the highest cultivation. She was infinitely close to innate. However, in a real battle, the difference in foundation and experience was gradually revealed. Ning Chen, Ghost Girl, and Underworld Child were undoubtedly the strongest people below innate. Although Yu Yu was not bad, she was still slightly inferior to the 3 of them. When the battle reached the most intense moment, the moment the 4 of them crossed each other, Ghost Girl used her incantation and showed the strange martial arts of the underworld. Ghost Desolation Art, 100 Ghosts Confinement Sky. 100 ghosts appeared, trapping the sky and locking the earth. Yu Yu could not dodge in time and was trapped by the 100 ghosts. In a short gap, Ghost Girl freed her hand. She raised her palm and slammed it on Underworld Child's chi. A piece of underworld origin flew out and was caught by Ning Chen. At the same time, the black sword condensed into frost and pierced Underworld Child's heart without mercy. The Devil Cultivator was injured and became even more crazy. He slapped both of them, flew out and vomited blood. Ha! His crazy laughter shook people's hearts. Dark blue flames rose around the Underworld Child's body, forming an extremely strong pressure in the dark space. Ghost Desolation Art, Soul Severing. The Ghost Girl condensed her technique, and cold ghost chi filled the sky. Her slender hand carried the power of 10,000 caddies as it pressed toward the Ghost Girl. With a hong sound, their extreme moves collided. The 2 individuals both took 2 steps back, their bodies dyed in vermilion. A flying feather, heaven and earth, 1 sword. In that instant, the sword that was heading straight for him split into 100,000, and the 100,000 condensed into 1. It pierced into Underworld Child's heart meridian through the same wound as before. Blood sprayed out and dyed the body of the ink sword red. Underworld flames burn the heavens. The burning sky underworld flame rose and spread out with a loud bang. Ning Chen was the first to bear the brunt of it. He was directly sent flying 30 meters away, and black blood splattered all over the ground. The Ghost Lady was also affected by the nether flame. She retreated a few steps before stabilizing her body. At this moment, the 100 ghosts were engulfed by the underworld flames and quickly dissipated. Yu Yu escaped and immediately came to Underworld Child's side. Yu Yu, let's go. Underworld Child smiled faintly. With a light step, he disappeared behind the blue flames. Yu Yu followed and disappeared as well. Ning Chen and the ghost lady's expressions were solemn. Even this couldn't kill him. This underworld child was truly terrifying. In the next moment, Ning Chen's chest tightened, and he vomited a mouthful of blood. He looked exhausted. The ghost lady immediately went forward. Her vermilion lips parted slightly, and wisps of ghost qi guided the underworld poison from Ning Chen's body into her mouth. It temporarily suppressed the poison that could explode at any time. You can't use your true qi anymore. The ghost lady warned. Although she could cure the underworld flower's poison, there was a limit. Once the underworld flower's poison spread, even a deity would be powerless. Ning Chen nodded and softly agreed. Leave the rest to me. With that, the ghost lady walked in front of one of the doors. She flipped her hand and slammed her palm on the door. A violent vibration sounded. The door shook, but it was still firmly shut. No, it's not that. Ning Chen spoke and reminded. Hearing that, the ghost lady looked at the remaining two doors. Under Ning Chen's signal, she walked to the door in the middle. She raised her cultivation to the peak, and the ghost qi in the sky crashed into the door. In the shocking explosion, the door was blasted open. The scene that had been sealed for 10,000 years finally appeared in front of them. Be careful. Ning Chen's expression changed. He slammed his wheelchair and instantly came in front of the ghost lady. He only had time to push her away before he felt his chest sink and a sharp pain came. The headless horseman's spear pierced through Ning Chen's heart. Black blood spilled out. It was extremely terrifying. In the next moment, 3 more spears slashed down. The yin qi was dense and threatening. Ning Chen ignored the spears in his chest. He condensed his left hand and caught the spear that was slashing down. At the same time, he waved his ink sword and swept away the remaining 2 headless horsemen. The familiar scene made Ning Chen's heart tremble. This time it was not an illusion. That meant that the Yin soldiers and headless horsemen he encountered in the underworld had existed before. Things were different now. Ning Chen was no longer the beginner of martial arts. However, facing these headless horsemen, he still felt a heavy pressure. In the stone room, a golden piece of paper floated above the stone platform. It was obviously the heavenly book that the 2 of them were looking for. The 4 headless horsemen cooperated well. Each of them was at the peak of the 9th stage. They firmly blocked the way forward. I'll hold them back. You go and get the heavenly book, Ning Chen said solemnly as he cut the spear in his chest. Be careful. Ghost Woman instructed, and then she took a step forward and flashed out swiftly. The spear was waved in an attempt to block the way forward. However, the ink sword condensed into frost. The sword's power was shocking. It slashed out a huge ravine that was 10 feet long. The ghost lady took the opportunity to charge in. She came before the heavenly book and grabbed it. Retreat. Ning Chen covered the ghost lady and came out. He waved his sword and made a prompt decision. The ghost lady was not a sloppy person. She also sent out a palm and quickly retreated. The sword and palm moved together. With a loud bang, they blocked the 4 headless horsemen's steps. In the blink of an eye, the 2 of them had disappeared without a trace. In the next moment, the ghost palanquin flew through the night sky, quickly heading north. An hour before daybreak, the 2 of them finally returned to the underworld. After Ning Chen returned, he immediately went into seclusion to heal. The ghost lady stood guard at his side, helping to transfer the small piece of nether spring that she had taken from the underworld child into his body. The nether spring was too small. It was less than 1/5 of its original size. The underworld child had protected the nether spring within the vortex in his dantian. Although the ghost lady's palm had shattered the nether spring, she had only managed to force out a small piece. 2 days later, Ning Chen finally suppressed his injuries. Unfortunately, the nether spring was too small. It was far from enough to heal his organs that had been damaged by the heavenly flame. Actually, we can try to open the last 2 gates. Perhaps there will be a way to solve your body's problem, suggested the ghost lady. There were 7 gates in the Yin tomb, and this heavenly tome was only ranked 5th. That meant there was something even more incredible behind the last 2 gates. There's no need. Ning Chen shook his head and continued, right now, no one knows when the 2 tombs will switch between life and death. When it will start, when it will end, and if there's a pattern to it. Furthermore, the 4 gatekeepers that have appeared this time are monsters that can't be killed. If a Xiantian realm existence comes out of the last 2, we won't even have a chance to escape. But your injuries. The ghost lady was a bit worried. It's fine. With this underworld spring, the yellow spring's flowers poison won't spread for now. It's actually pretty good to have an undying body. The heavens have already treated me well, said Ning Chen with a faint smile. The people of the underworld never believe in the heavens, sighed the ghost lady. Actually, I don't believe in it either. Ning Chen smiled. Alright, now that you have the heaven and earth scrolls, you should try to break through to the Xiantian realm. I'm fine for now, so don't worry. The ghost lady nodded. Be careful. I might be in seclusion for a long time this time. If there's nothing important, don't leave the underworld. Ning Chen smiled and didn't reply. Half a day later, the ghost lady entered seclusion in the deepest part of the underworld. She sealed off the surrounding 5 kilometers and wouldn't come out until she reached the Xiantian realm. That night, Ning Chen left in the ghost sedan chair. When he stepped into one of the Grand Xia's cities, he heard the most shocking news. Yayang City had been breached. More than half of the 90,000 Imperial Army soldiers had died. The Red training camp had been completely annihilated, and less than 10,000 Azure Sparrow camp soldiers were left. Just 2 days ago, Northern Meng, who had been using the strategy of exhausting the enemy, suddenly launched a large-scale attack on Yayang City. Left with no choice, the 90,000 Imperial Army soldiers and 40,000 city guards all went into battle to defend the city. However, something unexpected happened. After Northern Meng's army, more than 1,000 catapults were transported to the front of the city. They lined up in a row and crazily threw huge black pots into the city. No one would have thought that these black pots would become the nightmare of the Grand Xia's Imperial Army and city guards. After the pots broke, black water flowed out and continuously spread. No one knew what this black water was. It was only when the sky was filled with fire arrows that the nightmare truly began. The black water started to burn crazily. Once a person came into contact with it, the fire could no longer be extinguished. He would be burned alive. The black water couldn't flow out of the city walls and could only flow into the city. The fire also spread rapidly along with the pots that were continuously thrown into the city. It couldn't be stopped. The fire in Yayang City burned for an entire day. It could be seen clearly from 100 kilometers away. Yayang City was in a miserable state. The Imperial Army had suffered heavy casualties and lost the city walls. In the battle that happened 1 day later, they were defeated again. In this battle, Northern Meng also suffered heavy casualties. Their army of 250,000 was reduced to less than 200,000. However, the most important 100,000 steel cavalry and 10,000 heavy cavalry suffered very few casualties. Compared to the importance of the outcome of this battle, this price was completely acceptable. Under the night sky, the ghost sedan chair streaked across the night sky and rushed towards the north. 2 hours later, Ning Chen arrived at Yayang City. Looking at the scorched earth, his heart was abnormally heavy. At a corner of the city wall, there were still some remnants of armor that hadn't been completely burned. Ning Chen went forward and picked up a piece of armor. Immediately, his expression changed drastically. Crude oil. Chapter 166. The shock in Ning Chen's heart was unparalleled. The ghost palanquin swept past and rushed towards Jialing City. Crude oil was discovered very early in the history of Wuxia, but it was only used in modern times. One of the reasons was that these things were usually buried deep underground and not easy to extract. When he came to this world, he tried his best to avoid the appearance of things that surpassed the era. Every era had its own specific path of civilization, and he didn't want to destroy it casually. Things like gunpowder and crude oil, once they appeared in war, they would destroy the balance and cause more destruction. Great Xia had crude oil, this was something he knew long ago. However, he wasn't too worried. After all, many changes in thinking couldn't be done overnight. Just like the appearance of gunpowder in Wuxia, it was only used to make firecrackers in the beginning. When someone thought of using it in war, it was unknown how many years later it would be. It wasn't rare for ordinary people to discover this thing. In the past, Wuxia was even discovered and recorded in the Eastern Han Dynasty. However, discovery and use were two different things. From the Eastern Han Dynasty to the use of crude oil, it took more than 1,000 years. When it was used in war, it was only close to 100 or 200 years. Simply put, people's thinking and knowledge were limited. Just like the Marquis of Great Xia, he almost didn't have the chance to see these things with his own eyes. Even if he occasionally heard about it, he wouldn't take it to heart, let alone use it in war. And the people who discovered crude oil weren't at the level of Marquis, so it was even more impossible for them to think in this direction. The ghost palanquin came to Jialing City. A few days ago, Northern Meng launched a surprise attack and took down this city. During those days, he was unconscious in the underworld and didn't know about this news. Jialing City was close to a mountain and its geographical location wasn't important. Logically speaking, it shouldn't be the target of Northern Meng's attack. After Ning Chen came to the city, he didn't stop at all and directly rushed to the several camps where Northern Meng's army had been stationed in the past. The campsite required for a 250,000-strong army was enormous. Ning Chen checked for nearly 2 hours and finally found some unusual signs. In the camp closest to Mount Li, marks were 1 inch into the ground. Obviously, they had pulled something very heavy. Ning Chen followed the marks into the mountain. At the place with the most marks, he saw a huge gully. The crude oil didn't flow much, obviously the surface part had been extracted. After looking at it, Ning Chen had a rough understanding of the situation. Without a doubt, Fan Lingyue already knew that there was crude oil here, which was why he didn't fire anywhere else but here. He had seen the crude oil residue in Yeyang City before. It was different from the crude oil here. It flowed much better. Obviously, it had been processed simply. It wasn't surprising that Fan Lingyue knew that Yeyang City had crude oil. After all, this wasn't a secret. Furthermore, Yeyang City definitely wasn't the only place with crude oil in Grand Xia. If they sent more people to investigate and inquire, they would surely find something. However, just like what he said, discovering it and using it were two different things. Fan Lingyue discovered it and used it, becoming a calamity for Grand Xia. Although the might of crude oil was far more than that, Fan Lingyue had already used it in the war when no one took it seriously. Ning Chen felt a little helpless. If it was him, without the memories of the later generations, it was very likely that he wouldn't have thought of this step. War had its own knowledge, such as weapons, armors, and catapults. Before seeing the shocking scene of Yuyang City being burned down, who would have thought that this ordinary-looking black water would have such great power? This battle was going to be difficult. Ning Chen sighed. After this defeat, the morale of Grand Xia would definitely fall to the lowest point. Defeat wasn't something that could be broken. What was terrifying was the continuous defeat. Ever since Great Xia and Northern Meng started fighting, Great Xia had never won and had always been defeated. First, it was the crushing defeat at Beizhong Plains. Then, Yangue City was broken. Then, it was the crushing defeat of Marquis Taiping's army. Next, it was Heaven's Gate that was broken. Today, Yeyang City was broken. This time, even the most elite imperial guards of Great Xia were defeated. The soldiers and commoners of Great Xia might very well have the thought that Great Xia might really not be able to defeat Northern Meng. Great Xia really couldn't defeat Northern Meng. This was something that absolutely no one would believe before the start of the war. However, today, not only others, but even the commoners of Great Xia had started to believe this fact. The invincible Great Xia had really become a thing of the past. Everyone had overlooked a fact. Actually, in this battle of defending the city, the imperial guards of Great Xia had done well. Apart from being stunned by Northern Meng's sneak attack at the start and suffering heavy casualties, in the battle of defending the city a day later, even without the protection of the city walls, they still showed strong combat strength. In the final battle, Northern Meng lost close to 60,000 soldiers. However, the number of imperial guards that died in this battle was less than half of Northern Meng's. Northern Meng had an overwhelming advantage in numbers. Breaking the city was inevitable, and no one could stop them. Unfortunately, Yeyang City was broken into such a pitiful state that no one would notice this fact. Fan Lingyue was a terrifying person. He knew how to scheme and scheme. He used the lives of 60,000 Northern Meng soldiers to open a path out of the city. After this battle, less than 10,000 soldiers were left defending the city. More than half of the 90,000 imperial guards were lost. The Red training camp was wiped out, and the Green Sparrow camp was basically destroyed. Of the three camps, only one was left. Along with Yeyang City being broken, it was a huge blow to their morale. 60,000 Northern Meng soldiers in exchange for Yeyang City and the fear of the entire Great Xia was definitely worth it. Furthermore, Northern Meng's most important 100,000 iron cavalry and 10,000 heavy cavalry were perfectly fine. This was the true nightmare of Great Xia. Simply put, after this battle, Great Xia was in danger. The fall of a country was no longer a joke. Instead, it was a huge problem that everyone in the Emperor dynasty had to face. Weiyang Palace, Heavenly Mandate Hall, and Grand Scholar's Manor. After the three most powerful people in Great Xia received the news of Yeyang City falling, they all fell into silence. Xia Mingri's brows were locked tight. He had already listened to Ning Chen's suggestion. If they could not win, they should try their best to drag it out until autumn. Who knew that even if Great Xia defended, they would still lose time after time. They could not win and could not defend. That advisor of Northern Meng was so strong that it exceeded their expectations. Great Xia was in a passive state. If this continued, they would really be wiped out. The assassinations in the imperial city continued to occur every few days. With the death of the third prince, apart from the advisor of Northern Meng, no one knew how many people there were. The nobles in the imperial city were anxious every day, afraid that they would be the next to die. The imperial guards of the 6 camps were patrolling day and night, trying their best to find the assassins. However, the imperial city was too big. Previously, they had borrowed the power of the third prince to sneak into the city. It was easier said than done to find them again. In Weiyang Palace, Zhang Sun stood in front of the window and looked at the night sky. She had a complicated expression and did not speak for a long time. Qing Ning stood at the side and did not say a word, silently waiting. They also did not expect Great Xia to lose again. One Fan Lingyue had almost destroyed Great Xia. Just half a year ago, Great Xia was still the invincible dynasty. Today, who dared to say such words? There were no excuses or excuses. They just could not win. If only he was here, Qing Ning sighed softly. In this world, the only person who could compete with the military advisor of Bei Meng was Ning Chen. There was no lack of smart people in Great Xia. However, the thinking of these two people had always exceeded everyone else by a large margin. They could no longer be described as simply smart. Zhang Sun looked out of the window and said slowly, he has already sacrificed too much for Great Xia. If not for him, Great Xia would not have lasted until now. Let's leave the rest to fate. Hearing this, Qin Ning sighed again and did not speak. Outside Jiaoling City, Ning Chen did not stay for long. After a simple inspection, he left in the ghost sedan. Northern Meng had broken through an important defensive line of Great Xia. Now, it was up to Duke Jingwu and the rest to deal with it. He had stayed in the underworld for too long. His understanding of the war was only at the surface level. He was not clear about many details and could not think of a solution for a while. It was getting late. He had to go back as soon as possible. The ghost sedan flew past the north of Great Xia. Before dawn, he finally rushed back to the underworld. Ning Chen did not know if he would have a chance to see the light of day again in this life. However, there was always hope to survive. He could not go out during the day. Fortunately, he had obtained a piece of netherworld spring. He did not have to worry about the spread of the poison of the underworld flower and could try to cultivate. At first, Ning Chen did not dare to be careless. He carefully circulated traces of vital energy in his body. When he felt that there was no change in his body, he tried to circulate more vital energy. However, when Ning Chen circulated 1/3 of his vital energy, the poison of the underworld flower showed signs of spreading again. Clearly, it had reached the limit of the netherworld spring. Ning Chen sighed. He had to give up temporarily. It seemed that the netherworld spring in his body was not enough to support his cultivation. Since he could not cultivate the scroll of life and scroll of earth, Ning Chen could only try to cultivate the scroll of heaven that he obtained from the Yin tomb. That golden page was with the ghost girl. However, he had memorized the mental cultivation method. Now, instead of carefully circulating the scroll of life and scroll of earth, he might as well try the scroll of heaven that he had no foundation in. Like the scroll of earth, the moves of the scroll of heaven could only be cultivated after reaching the Xiantian realm. Among all the heavenly books, except for the scroll of life, the rest did not focus on mental cultivation methods. The most important part was the few moves that were recorded after the mental cultivation method. Unfortunately, he could not cultivate them. The advantages and disadvantages of the heavenly books were very obvious. The scroll of life only had the mental cultivation method and basically no moves. Although he could cultivate the only move, it was frighteningly difficult. He estimated that he would not be able to cultivate it even if he practiced for another 10 years. As for the scroll of earth and scroll of heaven, only after reaching the Xiantian realm could he find out what was so special about them. After a while, faint blue lights lit up in the underworld. They were very weak, like fireflies in the dark, about to be extinguished at any time. Ning Chen cultivated the scroll of heaven for an entire day. Traces of vital energy gathered in his dantian, like a newborn baby, slowly but clearly growing. Chapter 167. The bright moon hung high in the sky and the night was enchanting. After a day of traveling, the northern Meng army stopped and set up camp. Fan Lingyue got off his horse and looked at the approaching Grand Xia's imperial city. The fatigue in his eyes grew stronger. Coughing sounds came one after another and blood stained his palm. Fan Lingyue glanced at it and his expression was as calm as ever. Half a year had passed since the war started. The current situation seemed to be in Northern Meng's favor, but the truth was not as simple as it seemed. Northern Meng's greatest disadvantage was that they had no reinforcements. They had fought too deeply and the reinforcements from the Northern Meng imperial court would not be able to rush over in a short time. Moreover, even if Northern Meng's cavalry broke through Grand Xia's imperial city, there were still many things to deal with. For example, the 300,000 soldiers that she had blocked outside Heaven's Gate and the reinforcements that were constantly gathering in Grand Xia. Unfortunately, she did not have that much time. The only thing she could do was to defeat Grand Xia while she was still alive. As for the future, Mingyu had to walk it himself. She believed that Mingyu could walk it well. She had watched Mingyu grow up and had stayed by his side for so long. He would not lose to anyone. She believed that Northern Meng would become stronger and stronger in Mingyu's hands. Under the night sky, the coughing sounds became more and more intense. Blood dripped from his fingers onto the ground and dyed Grand Xia's soil red. In the barbarian king's palace, a figure was kneeling on the ground, waiting for the king's orders. Follow him secretly. The barbarian king stood in the hall with a complicated expression. Yes. The figure received the order and immediately disappeared. In the southern border of Grand Xia, a beautiful woman was walking on Grand Xia's soil, searching as she walked. He was definitely not dead, but where was he? A man looked around in confusion, not knowing where to go. The vast Grand Xia was frighteningly large. A man walked day after day, searching for the figure in her heart. In the underworld, Ning Chen knew nothing about this. Perhaps he would occasionally think of that beautiful woman from the barbarian dynasty, but most of the time, it would just flash by and be replaced by national affairs. No matter what era it was, between a man and a woman, the woman's heart would always be filled by the other party. At most, the man would only think of that gentle smile when he was tired. Fairness between men and women had always been unrealistic since ancient times. Because of the difference in effort, women had sacrificed too much, while men had gained too much. There was no doubt that Ning Chen liked a man, but perhaps even he himself didn't know if liking and love were the same thing. In the underworld, Ning Chen only woke up on the 7th day. Inside his dantian, 2 extremely small cyclones were slowly rotating. Compared to the Scroll of Life and Scroll of Earth, they were still very weak. However, they could be considered to be in the initial stages of solidification. That day, during his battle with Eunuch Pei, he had shattered one of the cyclones in his body and temporarily gained the strength to fight against a Xiantian expert. If he wanted to regain it now, it would not be as easy as cultivating the Heaven Scroll. He could not continue cultivating the Life Scroll and the Earth Scroll. He could only cultivate the Heaven Scroll and the martial arts of the Zhongsun lineage that he had destroyed. The underworld spring within his body could only support a third of his true qi. Before the Heaven Scroll and the Zhongsun lineage's 2 cyclones grew stronger, he didn't need to worry. Outside the underworld, the Grand Xia's situation was still as passive as ever. Forced to move out 2 more battalions, the remaining 40,000 soldiers in Yayang City and the 2 battalions in Xiling City, a total of 160,000 soldiers were split into 2 groups to help each other. They had to stop the advance of the Northern Meng cavalry as soon as possible. The various forces of the Grand Xia were also moving to the north. Other than the loyal Marquis who was fighting against the Meniang Empire in the southeast and the Blackwater Army who was fighting against the Eternal Night Cult in the west, the rest of the reinforcements were all moving north. Moving reinforcements required time. Right now, the most important thing was whether or not these forces in the north could delay the Northern Meng cavalry before the reinforcements arrived. Within the Grand Xia's imperial palace, a ghost palanquin drove past. The patrolling dragon guard immediately went up to stop it. "It's me." Ning Chen got off the palanquin in his wheelchair and took out the dragon guard talisman. "Marquis Wu." All the dragon guards immediately knelt down and respectfully bowed. "Get up. Take me to see His Majesty," Ning Chen said calmly. Everyone got up and split into 2 sides. An Imperial Guard leader led the way in front, not daring to even breathe loudly. This was the newly appointed leader of the Dragon Guards. He had heard of the Marquis Jiming's reputation. Meeting him today, even though he was dressed in black, he still felt an indescribable pressure. A person's reputation was like a tree's shadow. The Marquis Jiming's reputation in the Grand Xia was too great. It could be said that the current Emperor Xia was single-handedly promoted by the Marquis Jiming. In the Heavenly Mandate Palace, Xia Mingyue got off the dragon throne and looked at the figure in front of him with a complicated expression. In the Grand Xia, the person in front of him was the person he wanted to see the most, but also the person he didn't want to see the most. It wasn't that the emperor was narrow-minded, but that such a person would destroy the balance of power of the emperor. However, he knew that Ning Chen was not greedy for power. He was willing to sacrifice for the Grand Xia again and again because he valued relationships. Everyone in the world thought that the Marquis Jiming was a cruel and heartless person. At first, he also thought so. Later, he realized how ridiculous this thought was. The Weiyang Palace was the biggest weakness of the person in front of him, but also the place he couldn't touch the most. He had his own mother, but after ascending the throne, he also didn't dare to neglect the person in the Weiyang Palace. "Come back and help me," Xia Mingri said seriously. Ning Chen shook his head gently and said, "I can't be out for too long. I have to leave before dawn. I'm just here to remind your majesty that it's almost time for the wheat grains to ripen. If you want to know the route of the northern Meng army, you can start from there." Hearing this, Xia Mingri was stunned and asked, "But according to the report of the spies, the northern Meng army still has enough food. There's no need to prepare for it in the short term. This will depend on Jingwu Duke's ability. The northern Meng army has always been heavily guarded. However, after the battle at Yeyang City, the northern Meng army also lost a lot of people. Apart from 100,000 cavalry and 10,000 heavy cavalry, they only have 80,000 soldiers left. The northern Meng cavalry can run very fast, but the remaining 80,000 can't run that fast." At this point, Ning Chen thought for a while and continued, "As for the black oil in Yeyang City, your majesty doesn't need to worry. Just let the spies keep an eye on it. This kind of surprise attack can only be used once. If it really appears in the northern Meng army, just send a martial arts expert to burn it. This kind of thing is easy to burn and will spread quickly. At that time, the northern Meng army will be the ones to suffer. However, with the intelligence of the northern Meng military advisor, he shouldn't make such a mistake." Xia Mingyue listened seriously and didn't miss a single word. After Ning Chen finished, he asked, "Do you have any way to deal with the northern Meng's heavy cavalry?" This was a huge problem for the Great Xia. The western and northern battlefields of the Great Xia had been turned upside down by these heavy cavalry. "Yes, but it will be very difficult," Ning Chen said slowly. "What do you need?" Xia Mingri asked. 30,000 cavalry. The rest can't be explained in a few words. I will write down the specific methods in detail. However, there is one thing to note. Even if these cavalry are trained, they must be separated from the northern Meng's heavy cavalry. Otherwise, they won't have any chance, Ning Chen replied. Xia Mingri nodded and said, "Thank you." After explaining everything, Ning Chen didn't stay any longer and said, "Your Majesty, I still have something to do. I will take my leave first." After saying this, Ning Chen turned his wheelchair and walked towards the palace. Behind him, Xia Mingri sighed softly. His mood was even more complicated. Fortunately, there was still a Marquis Jiming in the Great Xia. Otherwise, who could contend with the military advisor of the Northern Meng? Jiming Marquis' manor. Ning Chen returned. Now, the Marquis' manor was no longer as lively as it used to be. In Weiyang Palace, although the two from the Heavenly Mandate Palace had been trying their best to maintain the Marquis' manor, it was only a matter of time before it fell. Lu Ruoshi still stayed in the Marquis' manor. This beautiful courtesan had already regarded the Marquis' manor as her home. No matter how the manor changed, she would not leave. Ning Chen sat in his wheelchair and walked into the backyard. The huge backyard was empty and lifeless. Little Ming Yu's room was empty. The little girl who used to pester him to tell her stories had now returned to the Northern Meng imperial court and continued to be the emperor. In the past, he always felt that little Ming Yu was too clingy. Now, without the little girl by his side, he always felt that something was missing. He had taught her to be benevolent and love the people. He also taught her to be decisive. He believed that Ming Yu would become a good emperor. The era of Ming Yu would always pass. The future of the northern Meng and the Great Xia would be decided by Ming Yu's generation. Marquis, is that you? At this moment, outside the door, a soft voice asked with a bit of nervousness. Ning Chen turned around and looked at the beautiful figure at the door. A touch of warmth flashed in his eyes as he said, "It's me." Hearing this familiar voice, Lu Ruoxi's eyes suddenly became moist and tears unconsciously flowed down. After not seeing her for a month, Lu Ruoxi had lost a lot of weight and her beautiful face had a bit of sickly weakness. "Come here and push me around the courtyard," Ning Chen said with a smile. Compared to the other women he knew, Lu Ruoxi was undoubtedly the weakest. She had no background, no strength, and even needed to rely on a man to survive. In fact, most women in the world were like this. It was just that the women he had met before were too powerful. For example, Qin Ning, Xia Miaoyu, Su Fian, and Fan Lingyue. However, there was only one Fan Lingyue in the world. Most people were still ordinary people. He had never thought of changing Lu Ruoxi. Being an ordinary person was good enough. She could live a peaceful life and not be involved in the storms of the outside world. "Marquis, are you going to leave this time?" Lu Ruoxi asked. Ning Chen was silent. After a moment, he softly said, "I came back to take a look." Lu Ruoxi understood what he meant. Her expression darkened and she no longer spoke. Chapter 168. The two of them walked around the manor for a long time. Ning Chen looked at the familiar yet unfamiliar manor, his mind filled with many thoughts. Unknowingly, he had been in this world for a year. Too many things had happened in this year. They seemed to be right in front of him, but when he thought about it carefully, they seemed so far away. Great Xia went from its peak to its decline. Emperor Xia died, and the world attacked Great Xia. This 1,000-year dynasty declined so quickly. In just a year, it had fallen to a precarious state. Great Xia being able to hold on for 1,000 years was already a miracle. In Chinese history, other than the distant Zhou dynasty, no other dynasty could last for more than 500 years, let alone 1,000 years. Great Xia's exhaustion had already shown signs. Just like the chaos of the 7 cities, he still didn't think that it was something that Prince Yu could do. However, this matter had happened a long time ago, and he didn't want to investigate it anymore. Many historical truths would eventually be buried in the darkness. Now that a new emperor had ascended the throne and the dust had settled, there was no point in investigating many things. Perhaps, Great Xia still had more internal problems that hadn't appeared, but it was no longer important. Great Xia's decline was coincidental, but it was also inevitable. However, Fan Lingyue's appearance brought this day forward by 10 years, 100 years, or even 1,000 years. Living in the same era as such a person was both fortunate and unfortunate. He didn't know whether Great Xia would fall or not, but he would try his best to stop it. As for the result, it wasn't something that he could decide. Fan Lingyue's greatest intelligence was that he was good at borrowing the power of the situation. There was a limit to a person's strength, and no matter how smart he was, he couldn't predict everything. However, as long as he grasped the situation and guided it, he could adjust the remaining details as needed. Great Xia's 1,000 years had buried too many hidden dangers. In this world, there weren't many people who would help others in need, but there were many who would kick them when they were down. Great Xia occupied the rich land of the Central Plains, and if possible, everyone wanted to take a bite out of it. Great Xia's strength was undeniable. Just Beimeng or Eternal Night Cult alone wouldn't be a match for Great Xia. However, if the two sides worked together, it was enough to go against the invincible Great Xia. As for the desolate city, Du-Yi Temple, and the internal strife of Great Xia, they were all the result of Fan Lingyue's actions. Since the start of the war between the two dynasties, Great Xia had used up too much strength due to various internal and external reasons. Only when they officially fought with Beimeng did they realize that they did not have enough strength. Ning Chen was clear that Great Xia had lost their best chance, and every battle in the future would be even more difficult. Under the bright moon, the two of them walked back to the inner courtyard. Ning Chen looked around and took one last look at the familiar manner of the Marquis. He said softly, "It's getting late. I still have to visit someone. Let's go." Lu Ruoxi's eyes darkened as she let go of the wheelchair and silently stepped aside. Ning Chen didn't say anything else. He summoned the ghost palanquin and left. Looking at the ghost palanquin gradually disappearing into the distance, Lu Ruoxi mustered up her courage and shouted with all her strength, "Marquis, if you have time, come back to the mansion more often." The words he shouted echoed throughout the mansion. Unfortunately, the people who were far away could no longer hear him. Or perhaps they heard him, but they didn't reply. The most difficult thing to repay in the world was love, because it was not something that could be repaid with hard work. It was just like how some people spent their entire lives trying to love someone, while others tried their best to forget someone. The will of the heavens was always playing tricks on people, and it was rare for it to be fulfilled. No one knew where love came from, but it went deeper. Hard work couldn't get it, and it couldn't get rid of it. Lu Ruoxi turned around and returned to her room. She couldn't hold back her tears any longer, and they fell like rain. Ning Chen left decisively without any hesitation. His heart was like steel. In the Haowu manner, the ghost palanquin came and shook off all the guards. "Everyone, leave." Xia Zi walked out and said, "Yes." The guards retreated and made way for the two of them. Ning Chen got out of the palanquin and looked at the man in front of him. "How have you been? How have you been?" Xia Zi replied. "I'm sorry for what happened before." Ning Chen said seriously. Xia Zi was silent for a moment before he said, "You didn't do anything wrong. You don't need to apologize to me. The result of that night was already the best." Great Xia could not afford to have the risk of a second coup to force him to abdicate. Hearing this, Ning Chen sighed in his heart. He knew very well that if it weren't for his arrow, Great Xia might have had another Xiantian expert. It wasn't easy to enter the Xiantian realm. If he failed once, the next attempt would be even more difficult. He didn't expect that Xia Zi would risk his life to block that arrow for the third prince. He also didn't expect that Xia Zi would enter the Xiantian realm at that moment. Unfortunately, that arrow changed everything. The night was intoxicating, and the gentle wind carried a faint chill. When it blew on the body, it was slightly cold. "Have you gone to see Mother?" Xia Zi asked. "No." Ning Chen shook his head. "If you have time, then go. Mother hasn't left Weiyang Palace since your accident." Xia Zi sighed. Ning Chen was silent and didn't reply. It wasn't that he didn't want to go, but that he didn't dare to. His eldest grandson was the person he respected the most in this world. Even when he got into big trouble in the past, he wasn't this afraid. At most, he would be scolded, but this time was different. How could he dare to go in his current state? Xia Zi saw Ning Chen's hesitation and said, "I don't know what happened to you after that day, but since you're still alive, you should go and report your safety. Let's wait a little longer." Ning Chen smiled tiredly and declined. Things weren't as simple as he thought. If he didn't go, Zhang Sun would know that he was still alive. Although he was worried, he didn't need to be afraid. If he went, then the truth would be revealed. At that time, Zhang Sun wouldn't be able to accept it. Xia Zi didn't try to persuade him anymore. He walked into the room and soon came out with 2 jugs of wine. "Here." Xia Zi threw a jug to him, then opened the lid and drank a mouthful. Ning Chen smiled and took off the black cloth covering his face. He also opened the lid and drank a mouthful. His face, which used to be delicate and pretty, had now been burned and corroded into a completely different appearance. Xia Zi glanced at him and didn't say anything. He continued to drink the wine. Wine was the best thing to drown one's sorrows. It had been intoxicating since ancient times. A few days ago, when Sinew was helping Mother with her makeup, she noticed that a lot of Mother's hair had turned white. Unknowingly, Mother also started to grow old, Xia Zi said as he drank. Ning Chen was silent. He drank the wine one mouthful at a time. He didn't feel anything. It was as if he was drinking water. Actually, Mother really hoped that you and Sinew could be together. Unfortunately, in the end, you still didn't agree, Xia Zi continued. Feelings can't be forced, Ning Chen said as he drank a mouthful of wine. He had always believed that love was a matter between two people, and not a matchmaker's word from their parents. This was the biggest conflict between him and this world. It was also the only thing that he couldn't compromise on. The two of them drank more and more wine. They emptied jugs one after another. However, it wasn't that easy for a ninth-rank martial artist to get drunk. When the sky was about to brighten, Ning Chen left. He sat on the ghost palanquin and returned to the underworld. An hour later, Xia Zi also stood up. He waved his hand to disperse the alcohol in his body and walked toward the imperial palace. Ascension Valley was on the eastern side of the Grand Xiao. It was close to the edge of the continent. It was an unknown place with picturesque mountains and rivers. A large waterfall fell from the sky, splashing water 30 meters into the air. The mist was hazy, and birds sang. It was like a paradise on earth. Outside Ascension Valley, a figure slowly walked over. Behind him was a simple sword rack. There were 5 different swords on it. Each step he took was the same distance, the same speed, and the same precision. In the Divine Continent, there were very few descriptions of Ascension Valley. This was a truly unknown place. There were far too many secrets buried within. When Prince Yen walked in, he immediately felt a strong pressure coming at him. Unfamiliar expert, this is not a place you should have come to. A cold voice rang out from the depths of the valley, warning him. I've come to ask for a drop of phoenix blood, said Grand Prince Yen calmly. Impossible. Please leave, replied the cold voice. Then I'll go get it myself, said Grand Prince Yen indifferently. How dare you? An angry voice came from the depths of Ascension Valley. The next moment, a rumbling sound came from the horizon. The wind and clouds changed. A huge palm formed and slammed down. Grand Prince Yen was not afraid at all. He clenched his fist and a red sword flew out. It slashed the sky and scattered the wind and clouds. Rumble. The ground shook and cracked. A powerful aura filled the endless yellow soil. It was cold and dark. It was as if it did not belong to this world. A decaying body rushed out of the darkness. The power buried deep in Ascension Valley could not bear it any longer and walked out. The moment it appeared, the world suddenly darkened. The murky aura of impending death was bone-chilling. It was abnormally terrifying. It filled the world and made the sky turbid. The figure in the gray fog opened its eyes. The aura of death was so thick that it could not be dissolved. There was no trace of life. Most of the old monsters were buried in their coffins, but they were frightening. The space shook again and again, unable to contain their existence. Whoosh! Rain fell from the gray sky. The road started to become muddy. Gradually, a second figure climbed out of the ground, followed by a third, a fourth. There were 7 figures in a row. They were all shrouded in gray fog. The aura of death connected to the sky. They were facing off against the legendary figures of the Xia dynasty. Their auras were at their peak. The sky became darker and darker. Not a single ray of sunlight could penetrate. 7 Xiantian lords, a terrifying lineup. This was the hidden trump card of the unknown lands. At this moment, they finally bared their bloody fangs. The 7 figures were peerlessly terrifying. They stood there like an endless black hole, devouring everything around them. In the next moment, a strange phenomenon appeared behind the 7 of them. A black ocean evolved with raging waves that reached a height of 300 meters. Stars fell one after another, but they couldn't even make a splash. This was a sea of death that annihilated all life. Once one fell into it, they would never be able to climb out for all eternity. Grand Prince Yen was as calm as usual. He waved his hand and a green sword appeared. Suddenly, green and red reflected each other. The sword light broke through the void. Chapter 169. When the 7 Khanate experts worked together, their power was earth-shattering. A black ocean trapped the sky and covered the stars. It was terrifying. Prince Yen held the green and red swords in his hands. One of them was covered in frost, while the other was covered in heat waves. He fought against the 7 without being at a disadvantage. In the Ascension Valley, the sky and earth were in turmoil. The collapse of the ground continued to spread. This was the most terrifying battle in the world. 8 Khanate experts working together was unimaginable. Among the 7 living fossils, there was no lack of old monsters in the 5th calamity. They were about to go through the 3 calamities. Their power was immeasurable. Prince Yen was not in a hurry. He waved his swords, stabbing, pointing, chopping, waving, and slashing. Every move was ordinary, but terrifyingly accurate. The 7 people's attacks were stuck in a quagmire. The more they fought, the more shocked they became. No matter how fierce their attacks were, they could not go any further under the sharpness of the green and red swords. They could feel that the stranger in front of them had not reached the 3 calamities realm, but his combat power was indeed terrifying. The 2 swords' attributes were completely opposite. The 7 people had a hard time dealing with them. Plus, their emotions changed. Eventually, a flaw appeared. Green and red breath at the same time, absolute chi. Prince Yen waved his swords faster. Streaks of green and red swords flew out, breaking through the gap between the 7 people. In that instant, Prince Yan's figure flashed rapidly. He waved his sword, and his green robe disappeared. When he reappeared, the sword light was like lightning. Boom, boom, boom. He waved his sword 7 times. The 7 people flew backward and landed on the ground. They vomited red blood and were seriously injured. Prince Yen sheathed his sword and strode into the valley. The powerful and unshakable power made the 7 people unable to stand up. Not only were they injured, but they were also shocked. Stranger, are you trying to provoke the anger of the Ascension Valley? Deep in the valley, the cold voice threatened again. Is it serious? Prince Yan's expression did not change. He said lightly. As soon as he finished speaking, the sand sword flew out and turned into a stream of light that shot into the depths of Ascension Valley. In the next moment, the sand sword fell straight down. In a huge explosion, the sky and earth were turned upside down and sand filled the sky. The existence deep in the Ascension Valley was shocked. Then, it was furious. A terrifying aura rose. It was about to come out. Don't be rash. At this moment, another voice rang out from the depths of the Ascension Valley. There's no need to lose half your life for a drop of phoenix blood. Give it to him. Phoenix blood is precious. How could it be given away so easily? The voice from before said unwillingly. The bigger picture is more important. Don't bicker over a momentary mistake, someone advised. Humph. A drop of dark red phoenix blood flew out from the depths of Ascension Valley and landed in front of Prince Yen. Take it. I will personally settle this debt in the future. Any time. Prince Yen put away the phoenix blood and said calmly. Since he had achieved his goal, Prince Yen didn't want to stay any longer. He turned around and walked out of the valley. When he passed by the 7 people who were heavily injured, he didn't stop at all. He didn't even look at them. A traitor who was willing to fall in order to live was too pitiful. Looking at the outstanding experts in front of them, a hint of shame flashed in the depths of the seven people's eyes. Once upon a time, they were also respected experts in the human world. Unfortunately, there was no medicine for regret in the world. They couldn't turn back. Prince Yen left with the phoenix blood. Not long after he left, the sky rolled and a vast amount of righteous energy appeared. It condensed into an old figure and blocked his path. Prince Yan's expression changed for the first time. He asked, "You are?" "Ji Taisher," the headmaster replied. Prince Yan's eyes flashed. The headmaster was actually still alive. The power of the phoenix blood is too overbearing. Ordinary people can't use it directly. Only the righteous energy of the Confucian sect can neutralize it. Bring Ning Chen to the academy. After he finished speaking, the headmaster's body gradually dissipated and disappeared. Prince Yen stopped and thought for a moment. Then his body flashed and he turned into a stream of light and disappeared into the distance. 300 miles to the east of the imperial city of the Xia dynasty. Banners were flying in the wind and the hooves of the horses were rumbling. The black mass of the Xia dynasty cavalry was running continuously and getting into formation. They were practicing new battle tactics that had never appeared in the army before. None of the soldiers of the Xia dynasty knew why they were practicing these strange battle tactics. They also didn't know why they had to practice again at night after they finished practicing during the day. "How is it?" In the distance, Xia Zi glanced at the person beside him and asked. Ning Chen looked solemnly and thought about every detail. After a long time, he replied, "If possible, continue to reduce the weight of the horses. Our horses are not as good as those of Beimeng. The horses used by the 10,000 heavy cavalry are the best of the best. We can't be careless and must ensure that nothing goes wrong." "Okay," Xia Zi nodded and replied. Ning Chen's eyes were solemn. Now it seemed that there was no problem with the training. However, when it came to a real battle, the effect would depend on the coordination of the generals on the battlefield. Most importantly, they had to think of a way to separate the 10,000 heavy cavalry from Beimeng's 100,000 heavy cavalry. It was impossible for the Xia dynasty cavalry here to deal with Beimeng's heavy cavalry. If they were engulfed by the flood of 100,000 heavy cavalry, they would be devoured in an instant. However, it was easier said than done to separate the Beimeng cavalry from the heavy cavalry under Fan Lingyue's nose. 2 days ago, the barbarian king sent a letter saying that he can borrow 100,000 soldiers to help the Xia dynasty tide over this crisis, Xia Zi suddenly said. Ning Chen was startled and couldn't react for a moment. What did the barbarian king mean by this? He didn't believe that the barbarian dynasty would be so kind. Although the barbarian king had saved him and Qing Ning once in Nanjiang, that was because of Ah Man. The barbarian king's personal actions had nothing to do with the barbarian dynasty or Great Xia. No matter when, personal feelings and national affairs couldn't be mixed together. What condition? Ning Chen asked. The entire Nanjiang, Xia Zi replied. Ning Chen was speechless. The barbarian king really dared to ask for too much. What did Her Majesty say? Ning Chen asked. Her Majesty hasn't decided and is currently hesitating. She wants me to ask for your opinion, Xia Zi replied. Ning Chen sighed softly and said, actually, there's nothing to hesitate about. Ceding land is absolutely out of the question. The Xia dynasty's territory was protected by generations of blood. Not to mention the entire Nanjiang, we can't give up even an inch of land. The precedent of ceding land definitely couldn't be set. The bloody lessons of Wuxia's history were still vivid in their minds. Those 100 years of darkness caused Wuxia, which had a civilization of 5,000 years, to lose all of its dignity. Even now, it was still paying for the humiliation of those years. Xia Zi was silent for a moment before saying, Her Majesty's hesitation is actually understandable. The current situation of Great Xia is indeed not optimistic. The successive defeats have greatly affected the morale of Great Xia's army. Furthermore, the military forces within Great Xia's territory are being restrained too much, especially by the Eternal Night cult. They suddenly have an additional 20,000 heavy cavalry. The Blackwater army and the reinforcements from the various cities are having a hard time resisting them. They need to constantly transfer troops over. Hearing this, Ning Chen narrowed his eyes and said, "It's not impossible to borrow troops. We can ask His Majesty to send an important envoy to negotiate with them to show Great Xia's sincerity. If possible, Prince Hua would be the best candidate. Since the barbarian king is willing to borrow troops, it means that he has the intention to negotiate. Any deal would be asking for a sky-high price and haggling on the ground. Other than ceding land, all other conditions can be discussed. The barbarian king has a small population and is lacking in resources. What they need the most is not land, but food, spices, and medicinal herbs. Coincidentally, Great Xia has plenty of these things. Moreover, the purpose of sending Prince Hua over is to remind the barbarian king that Great Xia does not have to borrow troops from the barbarian dynasty. Let the barbarian king guess." At this point, Ning Chen paused and thought for a moment before continuing, "As for True Pole Nation, send someone to inform Princess Miao Yu and cooperate with her to spread some rumors from the palace of True Pole Nation. It doesn't need to be too obvious. For this kind of thing, the more obscure the better. If it's too obvious, it will arouse suspicion. In addition, during the negotiation between the barbarian king and Prince Hua, he will definitely deliberately delay time to make Great Xia anxious. Therefore, we can send Prince Hua over with an imperial edict to set a time limit for the negotiation. With True Pole Nation waiting, the barbarian king won't dare to be too aggressive." Hearing Ning Chen's words, Xia Zi couldn't help but sigh. If he didn't know that Ning Chen was really only 17 years old, he would have suspected that the person beside him was an old fox who had lived for decades. "I will tell Her Majesty these words. I just don't know if Fourth Imperial Uncle will have any problems. After all, Father has trapped him for 20 years. Xia Zi sighed softly. Ning Chen didn't say anything, but he believed that Prince Hua would agree. In the current situation, it was still too early to think about the barbarian dynasty's reinforcements. The outcome of the negotiation between the two dynasties was still unknown. Moreover, even if the barbarian king sent out his troops, it would still take 2 months for the 100,000 barbarian soldiers to arrive in the north of Great Xia. As the saying goes, distant water cannot quench a present thirst. Too many changes could happen in 2 months. In the underworld, Prince Yen walked in and spread out his spiritual sense. However, he couldn't sense Ning Chen's aura. He couldn't help but frown. The entire underworld was empty. There wasn't a single person to be seen. Prince Yen continued to walk forward. When he sensed the restrictions in the depths of the underworld, he moved his feet and disappeared. This was the ghost woman's place of seclusion. Everything within a 10-mile radius was sealed. Prince Yen walked forward and touched the restriction. After a slight hesitation, he waved his hand and broke it. There were too many mechanisms and restrictions within a 10-mile radius. Unfortunately, in front of Prince Yen, they were like paper and couldn't withstand a single blow. In less than 15 minutes, all the restrictions outside the ghost woman's stone room were broken. Prince Yen opened the stone door and saw the only person inside. His frown deepened. At this moment, the ghost woman had reached a critical moment in her cultivation. The aura around her was surging. The power of the Ghost Baron, the Earth Scroll, the Sky Scroll, and the Life Scroll that Ning Chen had given her were all sublimated to the extreme. She was constantly trying to break through the Xiantian barrier. Prince Yan's expression was cold. When he sensed the familiar aura of the Life Scroll, a cold murderous intent flashed across his eyes. The Life Scroll. How could she have the power of the life scroll? In the sword rack, the red and green swords sensed Prince Yan's murderous intent and trembled violently. The swords had a sword aura. At this moment, they actually showed signs of flying out of their own accord. Prince Yan pressed his hands on the swords and said slowly, "Wait until dawn." Chapter 170. Time passed slowly. Prince Yan stood in the stone room, motionless, waiting for daybreak. In front of him, the ghost girl was at a crucial stage of cultivation. Her spiritual consciousness was tightly shut, and she knew nothing about the outside world. Prince Yan was a calm person and would not act rashly. That was why he decided to wait until daybreak. He knew very well that if Ning Chen didn't show up by daybreak, he would never come back. Outside the underworld, the ghost palanquin streaked across the night sky, rushing back. There were too many things that needed to be done today, and it took a lot of time. He hoped that he could make it in time. The sky outside was getting darker and darker. This was the last darkness before daybreak, and also the darkest moment of the night. The ghost palanquin sped across the northern part of the great Xia dynasty, leaving behind a flash of black light that could not be seen by the naked eye. Just as the ghost palanquin was about 10 miles away from the fog forest, the eastern sky quietly changed. Lightning appeared, and flames burned the sky, forming a terrifying apocalyptic scene. In the ghost palanquin, Ning Chen's body was burning with flames. The bone-piercing pain attacked him again, as if he was being cut into pieces. After a while, the ghost palanquin rushed into the underworld. In the sky, the lightning dissipated, and the flames disappeared. Everything returned to normal. In the underworld, Ning Chen activated the life scroll. Frost surged and quickly suppressed the flames around him. In a short moment, he experienced the transition of life and death again. Ning Chen breathed heavily, his heart throbbing. Luckily, he managed to make it back in time. In the depths of the underworld, Prince Yan, who had waited until the last moment, released his hands from the sword rack. The next moment, the green and red swords flew out automatically, drawing two brilliant streaks of light. The green and red swords were threatening. The ghost girl was in great danger. At this moment, Prince Yan moved and blocked the green and red swords. With a wave of his hand, he put the swords back on the rack. At the entrance of the underworld, Prince Yan walked over and looked at Ning Chen in the wheelchair. He did not ask anything and only said calmly, "You're injured. Don't run around." Seeing his senior, Ning Chen felt much more relaxed. He took a deep breath and said, "I've finished some things." Prince Yan nodded slightly and said, "Come with me to the academy tonight." Ning Chen did not understand and asked, "Why are we going to the academy?" "You'll know when the time comes." Prince Yan answered. Ning Chen nodded as if he understood, but didn't ask any further. "Come with me." Prince Yan turned around and walked forward. Ning Chen followed and walked quietly behind him. The two of them walked into Ghost Lady's secluded meditation area. Ning Chen pondered for a moment before he understood what was going on. Cold sweat dripped down his back. Fortunately, he had returned in time. Otherwise, even if the ghost girl had managed to keep her life, her cultivation would have been forcefully interrupted and she would have gone mad. "You'll have to repay this favor," Prince Yan said calmly. Ning Chen was stunned, and then he laughed bitterly. "Senior, the debt isn't settled like this. You can't push all the blame onto me. It's only right for me to repay Senior's debt," Prince Yan said calmly. Ning Chen was speechless. Was there such a thing? The two of them walked out of the stone room. Prince Yan pulled out his Zhiga sword and stabbed it into the ground in front of the stone room. Then he left with Ning Chen. A single Zhiga sword was more powerful than tens of thousands of restrictions. As long as one was not a Xiantian expert in a three disasters state, they would have to pay a price if they wanted to break through. Prince Yan was a reasonable man. He had destroyed all the restrictions within 10 li, so he returned her a Jiga sword. When she comes out of seclusion, come and get the sword and return it to me, Prince Yen said. Okay, Ning Chen agreed. At this moment, Ning Chen seemed to have thought of something. He asked, Senior, there's a sword in the underworld. Do you want to take a look? Prince Yen thought for a while and said, lead the way. Ning Chen turned his wheelchair and walked in front, towards the main hall of the underworld. At the shore of the Ruo Shui, there was a bottomless boat. The two of them crossed the Ruo Shui and walked into the main hall. In the spacious and majestic main hall, a blood-red demon blade and a purple-gold divine sword floated on a stone platform, exuding a powerful aura. Ning Chen pursed his lips subconsciously. He would be lying if he said that he wasn't jealous. However, if it wasn't his, it wasn't his. There was no point in being jealous. Those who were content would be happy. It was fine if he was jealous of something like this. Prince Yen walked forward and reached out to touch the divine sword. Instantly, the blade and the sword hummed together, and a dazzling light rose rapidly, resisting the incoming attack. However, in front of absolute power, the blade and sword's resistance was useless. They could only let Prince Yan's hand pass through the layers of restrictions and touch the sword. The sword is not bad, Prince Yen retracted his hand and commented. Can't we take it away? Ning Chen asked in surprise. We can take it away, but it doesn't want to go with me, Prince Yen said calmly. Ning Chen was helpless. Alright, pretend that he didn't ask anything. He forgot that the senior was someone who could understand the sword aura. He probably couldn't do this even if he practiced for another 100 years. After an hour, the two of them returned to the other side of the Ruo Shui. When night fell, they left the underworld together and rushed towards the academy. In the academy, the headmaster was waiting outside the hut. He looked at Prince Yen walking in front of him and nodded. Prince Yen also looked at the old man in front of him. This was the first time he saw the headmaster in person. He was different from the previous incarnations. He couldn't feel any warrior's aura. Now it seemed that the headmaster was the most powerful person in the world. Let's begin, the headmaster said. Okay. Prince Yen replied. He opened his right hand and a drop of blood flew out, floating in the void. Although it was only a drop, it seemed to have endless vitality. Ning Chen still didn't understand what was going on. He sat in the wheelchair, confused. The headmaster raised his finger. Suddenly, the wind and clouds rolled. Vast and majestic noble spirit gathered from all directions and poured into the phoenix blood. It quickly dissolved the violent and fierce aura in it. At the same time, Prince Yen came to Ning Chen's side. He pointed his sword and the congenital genuine qi poured into his body continuously, completely dissolving the poison of the netherworld flower. Ning Chen's body decayed quickly. However, with the help of the poison of the netherworld flower, he regained feeling in his legs. A painful sound was heard. The poison of the netherworld flower quickly entered his spiritual sense and carried out the final transformation. At this moment, the headmaster guided the phoenix blood that had been purified by the noble spirit into the space between Ning Chen's eyebrows to protect his spiritual sense. The poison of the netherworld flower that had entered his spiritual sense was quickly burned by the hot phoenix blood. It couldn't go any further. The headmaster and Prince Yen stopped and stood aside, waiting for Ning Chen to wake up. His body can't be saved. We can only protect his spiritual sense first. Let's see if there's a chance when he reaches the congenital level, the headmaster said calmly. That's the only way. Prince Yen nodded. His internal organs had been completely burned. This was irreversible damage. In the world, there had never been any magic medicine that could regenerate the internal organs of mortals. Of course, it would be a different story if one reached the congenital level. The difference between mortals and celestial beings was much bigger than one could imagine. It was not only the difference in strength, but also in other aspects. The difference between congenital level and congenital level could only be understood by those who had reached the congenital level. The netherworld spring in his body is a disaster, not a blessing. It's better to take it out as soon as possible. The headmaster reminded them. The two juniors are fooling around. He should suffer a little. Prince Yen said. If he didn't have the netherworld body, taking the netherworld spring would do him no good. He believed that the ghost girl didn't do it on purpose. The two of them were just fooling around in desperation. In the world, all kinds of special bodies were unique. If they could be changed by a piece of the netherworld spring, then the special bodies would be worthless. 4 hours later, Ning Chen woke up. He looked at the two people in front of him blankly. His head was dizzy and he couldn't come back to his senses for a while. Headmaster, I'll take him to get something. I'll take my leave first. Prince Yen cupped his fists and bowed politely. Okay. The headmaster nodded and didn't stay. Prince Yen took Ning Chen away. They didn't return to the underworld. Instead, they went to the two tombs. Now, the two tombs had become forbidden areas in the southeast. No one dared to enter. Monsters were released from the yin and yang tombs. Even during the transition between life and death, they couldn't enter. Along the way, Ning Chen finally understood his current situation. Simply put, with the protection of the phoenix blood, he didn't have to worry about becoming a living dead. However, there was basically no possibility of curing this body. Prince Yen didn't mention the netherworld spring. He was determined to let Ning Chen suffer a little to teach him a lesson. The two of them came to the yin and yang tombs. Prince Yen glanced at the two tombs and said casually, "Pick one." Ning Chen was speechless. Domineering. Senior said that the king medicine was useful to him, but one wasn't enough. After so many days, he didn't know which tomb was for life and which tomb was for death. However, it seemed that Senior didn't care. The yin tomb. Ning Chen still chose the yin tomb. He felt that since the scroll of heaven was inside, there must be something even more incredible behind the two remaining doors. Prince Yen didn't say much. He walked to the entrance of the yin tomb, split the yin qi in the air with his sword, and walked in step by step. The yin tomb now looked completely different. Yin spirits were everywhere. Every few steps would trigger a large restriction. Yin qi filled the air. It was a land of death. Needless to say, he obviously chose the wrong place. Fortunately, he had come with Prince Yen. The green and red swords danced in the air like two dark rainbows. They cut through the mist and cleared the obstacles in front of them quickly. Neither the yin spirits nor the restrictions could stop them. Ning Chen walked behind them with his sword on his back. He was stunned. Awesome. He didn't know how many times he had seen this scene, but he was still shocked to see it again. When he and Ghost Girl came, they suffered a lot because of the yin spirits. Not to mention, there were layers of restrictions and yin qi blocking them now. After a while, 4 headless horsemen appeared in front of them. However, their enemies were no longer Ning Chen and Ghost Girl, but the legends of the Xia Kingdom. The green and red swords flashed. Before the 4 headless horsemen could make a move, they were split in half by the 2 rainbows. They fell to the ground with a bang. Ning Chen's eyelids twitched. He was so shocked that he couldn't speak. In less than 15 minutes, the two of them arrived at the 2 unopened doors. Prince Yen glanced at the 2 doors in front of him. He grasped the green sword in his hand and slashed at one of the doors. With a loud bang, the door shattered. Amid the dust, a waterfall of mirror light flashed past, shining on the 2 of them. Chapter 171. The dazzling mirror light fell from the sky like a divine waterfall, illuminating the world. It was unstoppable. It came from the ancient past, crossing time and space. It was shocking. The green sword was illuminated by the mirror light and its light dimmed. Almost at the same time, the red sword flew over. The green and red joined hands to block the mirror light. However, after a short pause, the two swords were sent flying and stabbed into the ground. Ning Chen was shocked. He saw the mirror light coming, but it was too late to dodge. Just then, Yan Qin Prince moved. His figure flashed and he pulled out the abyss. The black sword light fell, creating a huge ravine that shook the world. The sword light and mirror light collided, causing the void to tremble. After a while, it could no longer withstand the terrifying power and shattered with a bang. In the violent storm, the green robe and black hair danced in the wind. He was as immovable as a mountain. Ning Chen came back to his senses and subconsciously looked behind the door. In the huge stone room, there was only an ancient mirror floating on a stone platform. It was simple and majestic, extraordinary and extraordinary. Yan Qin Prince walked in and broke the seal. He took the mirror and threw it over. "Give it to someone." Ning Chen took the mirror and looked it over. He couldn't see anything special about it, so he put it away. He would study it in the future. A treasure valued by a sage at the Three Disasters realm must be extraordinary. However, he didn't need it. It would be good to give it to a man to protect her. The sixth door was broken. There was only one left. Yan Qin Prince hesitated and didn't make a move. If he guessed correctly, the coffin of the tomb's owner was hidden behind the seventh door. However, it was at this moment that the seventh gate suddenly opened. In the blink of an eye, the entire great necropolis changed. Everything reversed, and the eternal world of darkness vanished. Stars twinkled in the sky, and boundless light poured down from the nine heavens. A sigh came from the void. A blurry figure walked out. The world changed color. Tens of thousands of years couldn't hide his peerless beauty. One could feel that this was an invincible man. His body was tall and straight. His shoulder-length hair was as white as snow. The vicissitudes of life filled the air mercilessly. A hero in his twilight years was so clear. The aura of supremacy covered the entire starry sky. Rays of divine light fell from the sky and covered his body. The sage was in his twilight years, but he was still so brilliant that it made the world lose its color. It was hard to believe that this was the afterglow of his old age. The ancient realm suddenly moved, awakening from its slumber. Primal chaos surged, and circle after circle of ripples spread out. It flew out from Ning Chen's body and landed next to the man. It trembled as if it was weeping, expressing its endless longing. The man retracted his gaze and looked at the wailing ancient realm cultivator next to him. He sighed softly and reached out to touch the mirror, as if he were comforting an old friend. Strange scenes appeared in the void. Streak after streak of light began to condense. Under the setting sun, a woman was playing the zither. Her appearance was extremely beautiful, and her temperament was otherworldly. Only, her fine black hair was already dyed with snow, her time having passed. Wavering moon. The ancient sage's body trembled. He suddenly turned his head back from tens of thousands of years away. The entire great tomb rumbled, and the stars continuously exploded. The dome of heaven bloomed with the most beautiful fireworks. A pair of eyes that had experienced the vicissitudes of time looked over through the primal chaos. The man took a step forward, crossing tens of thousands of li of starry sky. The stars in the ancient tomb world began to wither. Streak after streak of light streaked across the sky. More and more light streaked across the sky, becoming denser and denser. In the end, it was as if it was raining, dazzling the eyes. The heavens descended. The ancient sage's terror exceeded the scope of the world's imagination. With a single step, the entire world seemed to be destroyed. Stars fell, heaven and earth trembled. It was a world-shocking scene. A terrifying sign. At this moment, the ancient sage seemed to be walking out of time and space. His blurry figure gradually revealed a corner of his clothes. The tattered black battle clothes emitted an unchanging coldness. Bloodstains were everywhere, a testament to the ancient sage's accomplishments in his life. The primal chaos gradually dissipated. A trace of white was exceptionally dazzling. This man who had once protected the common people, who was invincible in the heavens and earth, had truly aged. Even though his body was still tall and straight, it could not hide the whiteness of his hair. You said that you would return. Under the setting sun, the woman was already very tired. Her eyes were dim, as if she would reach the end of her life at any moment. The sound of the zither was bleak. The tears of the woman dripped onto the zither. Her beauty had faded away, yet she was unwilling to leave. Wavering moon. Seeing this scene, the primal chaos around the ancient sage exploded. An indomitable figure walked out. The heavens and earth rumbled, thousands of rays of auspicious light shot out. With a single step, he crossed the starry sky and arrived in front of the painting in an instant. The man's body was trembling. His face was filled with the vicissitudes of time. Although he didn't look old, he was no longer young. His hair was as white as snow. This was an indisputable fact. The sound of the zither lingered in the air. The woman's eyes dimmed as she stared into the distance. Gradually, she was filled with disappointment and despair. Her tears fell like rain, scattering her last hope. The person she had been waiting for would never return. Their fate had come to an end. 1,000 years of waiting had come to nothing. The setting sun was as red as blood, and the woman's face began to age. At the beginning, a gentle red light rose up and stopped the aging process. However, the woman's body began to disappear. Starlight scattered in all directions, and bit by bit, she disappeared from the world. At the end of reincarnation, did he ever think that in a distant place, there was still a woman waiting silently for him? Was it a question, or was it reluctance? The final sound echoed through the great tomb. The ancient sage's expressions changed, endless pain flashed through their eyes as they closed them. Their trembling hands tried to grab the painting, but the painting instantly shattered. The sound of the zither stopped. Time was merciless, tens of thousands of years had passed. Everything vanished like smoke into thin air, unable to be retained. The ancient sage was so high and mighty. At this moment, he was no different from an ordinary man who had lost his true love. His tears quietly fell. Heaven and earth fell silent. Even the stars didn't dare to shine again. A soft sigh echoed in the void. The sage Gemini did not say anything. He reached out and touched the guqin in front of the woman. The sorrow in his eyes was so thick that it could not be dispersed. The next moment, the body of the sage of old gradually began to disappear. A cold wind blew, and a desolate scene appeared. The ancient realm fell from the sky. Everything returned to normal. It was as if it had never appeared. Ning Chen took the ancient realm and sighed inside. What had just happened was just the ancient sage's afterimage and the ancient realm's imprint. However, he had still felt a pressure that surpassed the heavens and earth. Even such an existence was powerless in the face of the death of a woman. Time was merciless. No one could resist it. He didn't know what had happened 10,000 years ago. However, there was no doubt that the ancient sage had returned too late. He hadn't even been able to see his woman for the last time. The seventh door was already open. Within the stone room, there were 2 coffins, but they were both empty. To the ancient sage, the most important thing was still that woman. He hadn't been able to accompany her for a long time when she was alive, but after she died, he had to accompany her for a long time. "Let's go," said Imperial Prince Yen calmly. "Yes." Ning Chen nodded softly. The two of them left the Yin tomb and walked toward the Yang tomb. This time, Yen Qin didn't have Ning Chen follow him. He entered the Yang tomb himself. Since the Yin tomb contained the coffins of the ancient sage, then the Yang tomb was just a fake tomb. No one knew what dangers lay inside. An hour later, dawn arrived on the eastern horizon. Seeing that the night was about to pass, Yan Qin walked out. He waved his hand and brought Ning Chen with him. They flew north. Azure and Red opened the path. The two of them were extremely fast. A dazzling ray of light appeared between heaven and earth. The moment the heavenly flame descended, another sword flew out from the sword rack. 3 swords appeared in the sky, blocking the heavenly flame. Light flashed through the fog forest. A moment later, the underworld gate opened and the two of them disappeared. The 3 swords were like rainbows as they entered the sword rack. Yan Qin waved his hand and sent the 2 king medicines to Ning Chen. With the one you obtained before, you should be able to last for a while. You should use this time to cultivate. Try to reach the Xiantian realm as soon as possible, said Yan Qin. The power of the phoenix blood was constantly being consumed. The 3 king medicines were the best nourishment. As long as he could reach the Xiantian realm, there was still a chance. Ning Chen nodded and entered seclusion with the 3 king medicines. He was only at the mid-9th rank and was still very far from the Xiantian realm. He had to hurry. Yan Qin stayed in the underworld for 2 days before leaving. The rest of the road depended on Ning Chen. He could only do so much. 3 days later, rumbling sounds came from the southeast. 2 large tombs slowly sank into the ground. The waves of fire and yin qi disappeared along with the tombs. Legends from 10,000 years ago would eventually fade away with time. Every era had its own legends. The past would never return. Before Ning Chen entered seclusion, he had already explained everything to the Grand Xia. Success or failure depended on Xia Mingri's decision. The northern Meng army's sharpness grew sharper with each passing day. The 100,000 cavalry were invincible. Coupled with the 10,000 heavy cavalry's destructive power, the Grand Xia's defeat continued. The remaining 80,000 soldiers of the northern Meng army were basically there to clean up the mess and escort the provisions. As long as they didn't attack the city, they probably wouldn't be of any use for a long time. The 160,000 imperial guards chased from the front and back, desperately trying to stop the northern Meng army's advance. However, there were several times when the northern Meng cavalry broke through before they could form an encirclement. The strength of the imperial guards of the Grand Xia was well known. The northern Meng was also trying their best to avoid a direct confrontation. After all, this was the territory of the Grand Xia. For the northern Meng without any reinforcements, the gains didn't make up for the losses. In the northern Meng camp, Fan Lingyue sat in her tent, frowning as she looked at the battle reports that had been sent over. The imperial guards of the Grand Xia were getting fewer and fewer. It seemed that the northern Meng army had shaken them off. However, she felt that things weren't so simple. Men, said Fan Lingyue. Present. A general walked in and respectfully waited for orders. How far are we from the army behind us? Asked Fan Lingyue. 120 miles, replied the general. Why are we so far? Fan Lingyue frowned. 2 days ago, the imperial guards of the Great Xia were really tight. The soldiers have been marching, and the troops behind us couldn't keep up, said the general nervously. Useless. Fan Lingyue slammed the table and raged, you didn't even report such an important matter. What's the use of having you? The general was so frightened that he shivered. He immediately knelt down and kowtowed, begging for mercy. Spare me. Chapter 172. The general was dragged out and given 20 beatings. Fan Lingyue walked in front of the map and looked at the location of the army, deep in thought. A few days ago, the Great Xia guards had been intercepting them, but their reaction was getting slower and slower. If this was a deceptive tactic, the goal was worth thinking about. She was confident that if they fought on the plains, the Beimeng cavalry would not fear anyone. Great Xia's Jingwu Duke would also not choose to fight on the plains. The Great Xia guards were tight at the front and loose at the back. They were obviously trying to increase the distance between the Beimeng army and them. As for their goal, it would be to split them up and destroy them or burn their rations. 120 miles was not enough for the Beimeng cavalry to be left in the dust. There was not enough time, and the possibility of a battle was not high. Hence, their goal was obvious. Thinking about this, Fan Lingyue said, "Qin Wuyo." Present. Qin Wuyo walked into the tent and said respectfully, "Immediately bring 7,000 light cavalry over. Great Xia might be eyeing their rations." Fan Lingyue instructed with a serious expression. "Yes." Qin Wuyo accepted the order and left the tent. After Qin Wuyo left, Fan Lingyue stared at the map in front and continued to think. Beimeng's rations could be considered sufficient. The central plains were rich, and the few cities that they had taken down all had large amounts of storage. Furthermore, their rations were sent in batches and were heavily guarded. Even if Great Xia wanted to take their rations, it would not be so simple. Actually, no matter the time, rations were the key to war. Great Xia's actions were not strange. However, Great Xia's Jingwu Duke was a person who used troops more than he was strange. Such a strategy was not his style. Fan Lingyue thought of a person, a lifelong rival. They were the people who knew each other the best in the world. Unfortunately, they were destined to be rivals. Fan Lingyue walked out of the tent and stood quietly in front of it. Looking at the scenery of Great Xia, her eyes were filled with determination. In a few more months, this prosperous land would no longer belong to Great Xia alone. When the Beimeng soldiers saw the beautiful figure in front of the tent, no one dared to disturb her. The night slowly passed, and when the sun shone down, a soldier rushed over on a horse. After dismounting, he quickly knelt down and said anxiously, reporting to the advisor, "The Great Xia army ambushed our rations, and 20% of our rations were destroyed. General Qing sent me to deliver the news." "Understood, you can leave." Fan Lingyue said indifferently. "Yes." The soldier withdrew and hurriedly left. Fan Lingyue's expression was the same as before, without any change. Since he had already expected this, there was nothing to be surprised about. As the saying goes, before the three armies move, the provisions must move first. Destroying the enemy's supply lines or supply teams was indeed a good method. This time, Beimeng's army was different from before. The grain was sent in batches to prevent Great Xia from doing that. 20% of grain was not much, and it was worth it to prove Great Xia's goal. When the army was about to break camp, Qin Wuyo rushed back and reported the situation in detail. After listening, Fan Lingyue asked, "How long until the wheat grains in the north are harvested?" "In the next 3 to 5 days, Qin Wuyo replied. Fan Lingyue nodded. His eyes narrowed slightly as he said softly, "In the next few days, we have to step up our defenses. Great Xia will still have designs on our rations." "Why?" Qin Wuyo asked in confusion. Their wariness of the grain would only get tighter and tighter. Even if Great Xia succeeded in their sneak attack, they would have to pay a huge price, so there was no need for that. "They're forcing us to change our path," Fan Lingyue said calmly. Qin Wuyo did not understand, and Fan Lingyue did not explain further. She just followed the orders. She could basically confirm that the person behind this plan was Ning Chen. The plan at the start was really good. Using a series of attacks to disrupt Beimeng's formation, and then waiting for a chance to sneak attack their grain. The first sneak attack was something she did not notice in time, and it was also the only weakness of Beimeng. Unfortunately, Great Xia was not good enough at the last step, and they only destroyed 20% of their grain. Beimeng's grain was much more abundant than what Great Xia had expected. Losing 20% was not much. It was a very unfortunate step. If Beimeng did not have enough grain, this loss of grain might have forced her to change her path. The wheat grains in the north were ripe, and it was time to harvest. If she wanted to gather grain, there were only two paths she could choose. Due to the limited land in the southwest, the wheat grains were scattered, and it was too troublesome for the army to gather them. As for the wheat grains in the south and southeast, they were densely planted, and it was easy to gather the grain they wanted. Great Xia only needed to block one of the two paths, and the remaining path was not up to her to choose. The real problem was where Beimeng would go after harvesting the grain. Great Xia would definitely block the south, forcing them to go down the southwest path. Now, it did not seem like much. However, the southwest direction they were going was actually the northwest of Great Xia. The further south one went on the northwest path, the more mountains and hills there were. No matter the time, this was a terrain that cavalry did not want to encounter. The idea was not bad, and she looked very far ahead. However, there were always changes in the plan. Ning Chen was not in the army, and he could not do anything about these changes. There was never a perfect plan in the world, and any ingenious plan needed to be adjusted at the right time. Great Xia's Duke Jingwu was a genius at arranging troops, but in terms of scheming, he was still lacking. Now that Great Xia had made their move, it was time for her to respond. In the Great Xia Guards barracks, Duke Jingwu sat in his tent. Below him, the 6 generals sat on both sides, discussing future war matters. Now, the 160,000 guards had split into 2 groups to block the Beimeng army. On the other side, the blood-clad Marquis had taken a detour to the south to block the Beimeng army. Hearing the opinions of the generals, Duke Jingwu's brows were locked tight. Their current position was on the plains, and facing the Beimeng cavalry was not a wise decision. Although the Great Xia Guards Legion Corps were the elites of the elites, facing the Beimeng cavalry on the plains, their chances of winning were slim. Beimeng did not have any reinforcements, so they were not willing to fight head-on. On the other hand, Great Xia had lost too many times and could not afford to lose again. In the current situation, Beimeng still had the advantage. The only force that Great Xia had that could go head-to-head with Beimeng was the 160,000 guards. However, they could not grasp the rout of the Beimeng army, and their blocking was too passive. Jiming Marquis had provided a good idea. However, it was very difficult to execute. Although they had gained a lot from this first sneak attack, they had also lost a lot. The Beimeng army reacted quickly, and with the help of the cavalry, they were much harder to deal with than expected. The first sneak attack could not be said to be a success or a failure. It could only be said that the result was not ideal. "Duke, should we continue to send troops to block the Beimeng grain transport team?" asked a green-armored general. "Continue, but be careful. Beimeng should have set up an ambush," reminded Duke Jingwu. "I understand." The green-armored general cupped his fists. In the southern border of the Grand Xia, a beautiful girl was walking on the streets, asking for directions. "Uncle, how do I get to Taiyue City?" The girl was very likable, and her attitude was also not bad. The old man who was asking for directions enthusiastically pointed at her. He then asked, "Miss, are you from the Grand Xia?" "Uncle, how did you know?" asked Ah Man curiously. Your attire is very unfamiliar." "It doesn't seem like the customs of the Grand Xia," laughed the old man. "Oh." Ah Man looked at her attire. She had not paid much attention to it. "Is this your first time in the southern border?" asked the old man. "No, I've been here before." Ah Man shook her head. The old man smiled and advised, "Miss, since you've come to the southern border, you should change your attire. That will save you a lot of trouble." Ah Man nodded thoughtfully. However, she hadn't run into any trouble. Ah Man didn't know that any trouble she had run into had been taken care of by the people following her in secret. Otherwise, what kind of beautiful girl would be able to walk the streets safely for so many days? When she had no money, she would even randomly pick up silver. Picking it up once was luck. Picking it up twice was luck. Picking it up 3 times should be a bit suspicious. Half a day later, a man had changed out of her imperial attire. She had even taken off the bits and pieces of accessories on her head. Wearing a simple green dress, she once again began to walk and ask for directions. "Aunt, how do I get to Taiwa City?" "What a beautiful girl." The old woman smiled. "Thank you for your praise. How do I get to Taiwa City?" A man continued to ask. "Miss, why did you come out alone? Where's your family?" The old woman held a man's hand as she asked. "I came out to find someone. I snuck out. How do I get to Taiwa City?" A man persistently asked. Come, come. Miss, my house is just next door. Come over and have a seat. It won't be too late to hurry on your way after drinking some tea." The old woman was delighted and enthusiastically pulled a man into an alley. A man felt a bit thirsty and obediently followed along. She didn't know that some alleys were called brothel alleys, and some aunts were called brothel keepers. The bodyguard following them in secret felt a headache coming on. Did this little princess not feel that something was wrong? That old woman's makeup was so bad that even her own mother wouldn't be able to recognize her. With a single glance, one could tell that she wasn't from a good family. Unfortunately, a man didn't feel anything. That was because she had never seen any brothel alleys or brothel alleys. She also didn't know what a brothel keeper was. In the past, with the protection of the barbarian king, she rarely even left the barbarian palace. She didn't know anything about the outside world. Later, she secretly ran out with Ning Chen and came into contact with quite a few things. However, those were things that Ning Chen wanted her to see. "Come, miss, have some tea." The old woman poured a cup of tea and handed it over. Her smile was like a flower that had grown out of a bad flower. "Thank you, auntie." A man received the tea and politely said, "Is the person you're looking for in Taiwa City?" The old woman sat down and poured herself a cup of tea. She took a sip and asked, "I don't know." A man shook her head. "Then what's the person you're looking for? What does he do?" The old woman beat around the bush. "He's called Ning Chen." A man replied. After saying that, she thought for a moment and continued with uncertainty, "I think he's Grand Xia's Jiming Marquis." Pfft. Hearing this name, the old woman spat out the tea she hadn't swallowed. Chapter 173. Cough, cough. The old woman choked on her tea and violently coughed for a long time. In the Grand Xia, the 3 words "knowing fate Marquis" were definitely not a good symbol. Miss really likes to joke. The old woman naturally didn't believe her. She rubbed her chest and forced a smile. "I'm not joking," seriously said Amon. The old woman didn't want to talk about this topic anymore. Many people in the Grand Xia knew that the knowing fate Marquis had died to the wrath of the heavens. In truth, Amon also didn't know much about Ning Chen. Ever since she had returned to the barbarian palace, the barbarian king had rarely mentioned Ning Chen in front of Amon. When he couldn't hide it, he would just briefly mention it. "Miss, wait a moment. I'll go get some fruit for you to eat on the way," said the old woman kindly. "Thank you, auntie." Amon smiled. The old woman quickly walked to the back of the hall. There were already several people waiting in the courtyard. "What's going on?" asked an old man. "A young chick has come. He doesn't seem to be a local. Based on his accent, he should be from the southern barbarian lands. This is business that has been delivered to your door. Do you want to take it or not?" "Yes." The old man nodded without the slightest hesitation. He waved his hand at the 3 people behind him and then quietly walked to the front of the hall. "For the Grand Xia to have such unruly people like you, it's no wonder my king is worried about the princess. The sudden appearance of a figure came without any warning. The five of them didn't even have time to react before a saber light flashed and their heads flew 3 meters into the air. Their bodies collapsed, dyeing the ground red. Amon waited for almost an hour in the front hall, but the old woman still hadn't returned. She curiously walked to the back hall and shouted, "Auntie, I'm leaving." The empty courtyard didn't receive a reply for a long time. Seeing no one return, Amon could only turn and leave. Her beautiful eyes were still filled with confusion. After Amon left, the 5 corpses and a large amount of silver from the back hall were thrown into the courtyard. The silver was dyed with blood and was extremely dazzling. 2 days later, Amon was on her way to Taiwa City when a young figure slowly walked over. His green robes were simple yet noble. His handsome and calm face made him look even more extraordinary. There was a simple and unadorned sword rack on his back, which contained 4 different swords. The person walked step by step, neither fast nor slow, not even a speck of mud staining his body. A man's eyes lit up and a brilliant smile appeared on her pretty face. She jogged over and hugged the person's arm, happily saying, "Senior, what a coincidence." A faint smile appeared on Prince Yan's calm face as he said, "What a coincidence. Where are you going?" A man smiled. "To the west. I happened to meet you." Prince Yan turned around and changed his direction. He answered as he walked. "Oh." A man hurriedly followed and continued to hold the former's arm. She asked, "I'm going to look for Ning Chen. Do you know where he is?" "He's in seclusion." "You can't see him now," Prince Yan said softly. "Then when will he come out?" Wild asked curiously. "Very soon," Prince Yan said. "Then he's come out of seclusion. Can you take me to see him?" A man said happily. "Sure." Prince Yan stopped and put down the sword rack. He said calmly, "But you have to carry it." A man tried to lift it but couldn't. She suddenly felt troubled. "It's too heavy. I can't carry it," a man said softly. Prince Yan waved his hand and the sand sword flew out. It scattered and wrapped around his sleeve. He said, "Try it now." A man tried again and finally managed to lift it. She was in a good mood and smiled brightly. Prince Yan's lips curled up slightly. He turned around and continued on his way. Let a man pay for the half a year that Ning Chen owed her. The two of them walked very slowly because a man had to stop and rest for a while. Prince Yan was not in a hurry. When a man stopped, he stopped and waited for the little girl to rest. The guard following in the dark did not dare to act rashly. He knew that this person was Prince Yan of Great Xia. He was one of the few people who knew about the battle at the barbarian palace last time. While the two of them were resting, the guard sent out a letter. 2 days later, he finally received a reply. There were only 5 words on the secret order: "You don't have to follow me anymore. Return." This was a letter personally written by the barbarian king. It was simple and clear, summoning the guard back to the palace. After receiving the secret order, the guard left on the same day and returned to the barbarian palace. A man knew nothing about this. Prince Yan saw it very clearly but didn't say anything. A man, do you want to learn the sword? I can teach you, said Prince Yan slowly as he walked in front. I don't want to. A man shook her head. Ha! Prince Yan smiled faintly and didn't try to persuade her. There were very few people in this world with a pure heart. Only a pure heart could sense the aura of the sword. So to him, a man was the only one who could inherit his martial path. However, Ning Chen had also said that a man wasn't interested in the martial path. He couldn't force her. You can teach Ning Chen. He's smarter than me. A man learned to put in a good word for a certain person. He can't learn it, said Prince Yan honestly. A smart person didn't mean they were suited for cultivation. Ning Chen had too many things on his mind. It was almost impossible for him to sense the aura of the sword. A man thought about it and still didn't want to learn it. Furthermore, if Ning Chen couldn't learn it, she definitely couldn't. The two of them walked for a while before a man suddenly thought of something. "Senior, why are we going to the west?" "To fight," said Prince Yen. "Fighting isn't good," said a man seriously. Prince Yen smiled. "He's a bad person." "Oh," said a man, agreeing with this explanation. The journey from Nanjiang to the west of the Grand Xia was very long. Prince Yen had a burden behind him, so he didn't know when they would arrive. Half a month later, the two of them finally left Nanjiang. After man got used to the weight of the sword rack, she walked much faster. No matter what, this little girl still had some foundation in the martial path. It was true that a man didn't like to cultivate. After 10 years, the speed at which she reached the 4th rank was so slow that it made one's hair stand on end. However, considering man's attitude of wanting to fish for 10 days, being able to reach the 4th rank was also a strange thing. On the other side, the war between Northern Meng and the Grand Xia changed again. Duke Jingwu sent troops to attack Northern Meng's grain transport team. After a few times, he finally succeeded once and destroyed a large amount of Northern Meng's grain. The process was very tragic. Both Northern Meng and the Grand Xia paid a huge price. Northern Meng set up many ambushes, but the Grand Xia wouldn't fall for it so easily. After a few exchanges, they finally grasped the weakness of Northern Meng's uneven division of troops. They used the Imperial Army as bait to attract Northern Meng's attention. Afterward, the 5,000 elite cavalry of the Divine Wind Battalion took the chance and destroyed Northern Meng's heavily guarded grain camp. The Divine Wind Battalion moved quickly. They came quickly and retreated quickly. When Northern Meng reacted, the grain camp was already on fire. The Divine Wind Battalion was the most elite Imperial Army camp in the Grand Xia. These 5,000 elite cavalry were strong enough to fight against 10. The ambush set by Northern Meng couldn't be stopped and they suffered heavy casualties. However, just when everyone in the Grand Xia commander's tent thought that Northern Meng would gather grain along the southeast or the south due to the lack of grain, Fan Lingyue suddenly changed the route of the army in advance. They quickly went south along the southwest direction, causing the Marquis of the Bloody Garb to miss. No one knew what was going on except for the military advisor of Northern Meng. This was because that batch of grain was given to the Grand Xia by her. The grain was real and the soldiers who died in battle couldn't be faked. The only illusion was the amount of grain. A lie was always 70% true and 30% false, making it difficult to distinguish. War was the same. Since she saw through the Grand Xia's plan, how could she not give them a surprise? This sudden change of route completely messed up the deployment of the Grand Xia and also allowed Northern Meng to take the opportunity to break away from the encirclement of the Imperial Army. Northern Meng's path to the south to attack the Grand Xia was one step closer. In the netherworld, Ning Chen, who had been in seclusion, opened his eyes. The power of a 10,000-year-old king medicine was beyond imagination. The drop of phoenix blood in his spiritual sense had absorbed most of the medicine's power. However, the remaining power still helped him to advance from the middle of the 9th level to the late stage, one step closer to the peak of the 9th level. There were still 2 king medicines left. Originally, he needed to wait for a period of time before consuming them. However, Ning Chen was worried and didn't want to stay here for long. Thus, he swallowed the 2 king medicines in one go. The unusually large medicinal power surged wildly like a raging sea, difficult to control. Ning Chen relied on his immortal body and ignored it, allowing the medicinal power to surge wildly. Soon after, he completely opened up his Dantian sea of qi and frantically absorbed the wild power in his body. In half a month's time, Ning Chen's cultivation soared to the peak of the 9th level. During this time, Ning Chen attempted to use the surging medicinal power to break through to the Xiantian realm. The result was undoubtedly a failure. If the Xiantian realm was so easy to reach, there wouldn't be so few Xiantians in the world. Of course, the two king medicines weren't completely useless. At the very least, they temporarily repaired his body that had been corroded by the yellow springs flower and allowed him to take off the black cloth. Unfortunately, even the power of the king medicines couldn't repair the completely damaged internal organs. Without reaching the Xiantian realm, the damage to the internal organs was irreversible. The peak of the 9th level was only one step away from the Xiantian realm. However, in reality, it was a whole layer of heaven. After practicing for another 2 days, Ning Chen repeatedly encountered the Xiantian realm barrier. It was difficult for him to move forward. He stood in the world, but he couldn't cross it. The king medicine's power was decreasing, which meant that the days he could practice were decreasing. Ning Chen had no choice but to temporarily give up on breaking through to the Xiantian realm and focus on practicing the Taoist secret method that Dao Kuei gave him. Senior Jiang once said that this secret method was the most suitable method in the world for practicing the life scroll. If he wanted to improve his strength, this was the fastest way. Ning Chen operated the life scroll. Suddenly, the surrounding temperature dropped rapidly. Frost appeared and floated down from the sky like snowflakes. The secret method was divided into 2 parts, created for people with 2 different constitutions. His constitution was cold, so he could only practice half of it. The name of this half was very special. It was called the art of clear snow. It was perfected by generations of Taoist sages after tens of thousands of years. They wanted to compete with the heavenly tomes. Among the heavenly tomes, other than the life scroll, all had their own unique mental cultivation methods and moves. Only the life scroll was an exception. Therefore, the Taoist sages created this secret method to make up for the shortcomings of the life scroll. The art of clear snow was the first method under the heavenly tomes. To a certain extent, the 4 words in the middle could be removed. Chapter 174. Ning Chen's cultivation lasted for another half a month. The art of clear skies before snow was complicated and difficult to cultivate. It was comparable to the heavenly writing. During this half a month, the situation in Great Xia became even more serious. After breaking free from the encirclement, the Beimeng army continued down south, and it was hard to stop them. The soldiers that Great Xia hurriedly moved over from various places were too weak compared to the Beimeng iron cavalry. The Great Xia cavalry 300 miles east of the imperial city was still practicing the tactics that Ning Chen left behind. Xia Zi watched day and night, waiting for the moment to succeed. In the west of Great Xia, Prince Yan and Ah Man were heading west. They were not far from their destination. In the west, Marquis' triumphant return and the Blackwater army tried their best to stop the Eternal Night cult's invasion. With the help of the surrounding cities, they barely managed to maintain the stalemate. In the southeast, Meniang country invaded. Marquis loyal and brave fought a tough battle. 150,000 Great Xia border soldiers fought a bloody battle to protect the southeast of Great Xia from being invaded. Now, the most urgent battlefield was in the north. Fan Lingyue's army was advancing deeper and deeper. Great Xia could not stop them. 100,000 cavalry showed their abilities, shocking the world. This was the first time in history that more than 100,000 cavalry had appeared. This was a true flood of molten iron. Nothing could stop them. Fan Lingyue's management of the army was strict. The fighting quality of the army was abnormally strong. 7 years of training was all for this war. 300,000 troops entered and left Great Xia. Excluding the 50,000 left at Heaven's Gate, there were less than 200,000 left. However, compared to Great Xia's losses, these sacrifices were less than 1/10. In the first half of the war, because of Emperor Xia's arrogance and stupidity, Great Xia missed many opportunities and suffered defeat after defeat. In the middle half of the war, Great Xia had many internal problems, causing a great loss of national strength. Now, the war between the two dynasties had entered the second half. The survival of Great Xia depended on this final game. The negotiations between Great Xia and the barbarian dynasty had a breakthrough. The barbarian king demanded an exorbitant price. Prince Hua agreed to most of the conditions, but he did not relent on the matter of ceding land. The negotiation period was only 14 days. Great Xia's attitude was clear. They would fight for it with all their might, but it was not necessary to succeed. In fact, the barbarian king had some doubts when he saw Prince Hua. He thought of the marriage between Great Xia and True Extreme Nation. It was a fact that True Extreme Country and Great Xia were not on good terms. However, there was no true friendship between countries. There were only interests. Moreover, it was not the first time that the barbarian dynasty and Great Xia had fought. In the past, Great Xia had sent Marquis Jiyu to guard Nanjiang with the purpose of preventing the barbarian dynasty from invading. Since the barbarian dynasty could borrow troops, the True Extreme Nation could do the same. Furthermore, Great Xia and True Extreme Country had a layer of relationship. As long as they did not fall out with each other, this layer of relationship was a good excuse for a trade. In the end, Prince Hua threw out another huge temptation. As long as the barbarian dynasty was willing to lend troops, Great Xia was willing to sell 20% of Bai Ruiyuan's iron ore for the next 10 years to the barbarian dynasty at the original price. At this moment, even the barbarian king could not help but be moved. Bai Ruiyuan was the largest source of iron ore for Great Xia, and its mineral reserves were shockingly rich. What the barbarian dynasty lacked the most was iron. With these iron ores, the weapons and armor of the barbarian dynasty would be completely new. With this condition, the following negotiations were abnormally smooth. The barbarian king and Prince Hua were both old foxes who had lived for decades. They knew when to advance and when to retreat. In just a few days, the remaining conditions were agreed upon. Not long after Prince Hua returned to the court, the barbarian king ordered the deployment of troops. 100,000 barbarian soldiers majestically embarked on the journey to the north, adding another variable to this war. After receiving this news, Fan Lingyue calculated the impact of the barbarian dynasty's participation in the war. The northern battlefield between the barbarian dynasty and Great Xia was very far away. It would take at least 2 months to arrive. By that time, it would already be autumn, and the situation between the two dynasties would be more or less settled. In the west of Great Xia, Prince Yan and his little burden, who had been traveling for more than a month, finally arrived at their destination. When Prince Yan and Marquis met, they smiled faintly. Prince Yan was the legend of Great Xia, and Marquis was the invincible military god of Great Xia. Long time no see. Marquis Kaishian said. Long time no see, Prince Yan replied. Are you here to look for a sword? Marquis Kaishian asked. No, Prince Yan shook his head and said calmly, a junior saw that I was too bored and found something to do. Marquis Jiming? Marquis Kaishian asked. Among the younger generation of Great Xia, only the legendary Marquis Jiming could invite the person in front of him. Heh, Prince Yan chuckled, tacitly admitting it. When? Marquis Kaishian asked calmly. Since he wasn't here to look for a sword, his purpose was obvious. There was no need to ask further. Tomorrow, Prince Yan replied. Marquis Kaishian nodded and arranged for tents for the two. On the other side, he sent a soldier to deliver a letter to the martial monarch. In tomorrow's battle, they might be able to see if the martial monarch of Eternal Night cult was truly invincible. As night fell, Prince Yan stood in front of the moon. His green robe fluttered in the wind. His body gradually merged with the world, as if he would break through the sky at any moment. The current legend of Great Xia was a true genius of the generation. He had practiced martial arts for 27 years, crossed the Khanate realm, and transcended 5 tribulations. If there was one person in the world who could fight a 5th tribulation realm cultivator against a 3 calamity realm cultivator, it would be Prince Yen of Great Xia. In the army, the patrolling soldiers looked at the distant figure in the night. No one dared to disturb him. Of course, there was one exception. Senior, a man ran over, instantly breaking this transcendent atmosphere. "What's wrong?" Prince Yen asked with a smile. "Here's a peach for you," said a man happily as she handed over one of the 2 big peaches. "Where did you pick it?" Prince Yen asked softly. The peach was very fresh. It was obvious that it had just been picked. It was impossible for the army to have it. "There," said a man with a smile as she pointed to the southeast. Prince Yen smiled and didn't say anything. This girl really knew how to run. "Senior, you have to win tomorrow. Good luck." A man clenched her fists and encouraged him. "Okay," said Prince Yen softly. "I'm going to sleep." After eating the peach, a man clapped her hands and said goodbye with a smile. She then jogged back to her tent. The peaceful night quickly passed. When the sun rose the next day, the heavy cavalry of Eternal Night Cult and Great Xia's Blackwater army were both on alert. They faced each other 10 kilometers away, nervously waiting for the battle to begin. The martial monarch appeared. He was wearing black armor and the Tianhuang halberd was ferocious. At that moment, the sound of footsteps could be heard from the distance. A young figure walked over in the light of dawn. His steps were neither fast nor slow. Each step was steady. Everyone couldn't help but look over. In front of the heavy cavalry, the 3 generals narrowed their eyes. Was this the legend of Great Xia? He was really too young. "Please," said the martial monarch, giving the strong cultivator in front of him enough respect. "Please," replied Prince Yen. After that, the martial monarch moved. He stepped on the ground and concentrated his divine power on his halberd. The world-shocking power caused the ground to crack. The powerful divine power spread all the way to Prince Yen. Facing the divine power, Prince Yen did not move at all. With a slight shift of his mind, the green and red swords flew out and streaked across the sky. They sliced through the air in front of the cracked ground. In the next moment, a huge gully appeared. The 2 forces collided with each other and the color of the sky changed. Everything within 10 kilometers seemed to have been hit by a heavenly tribulation. The ground kept shaking. The 2 huge cracks continued to spread until they were 30 kilometers away. The 2 armies had no choice but to retreat another 5 kilometers. They watched the battle from 30 kilometers away. The power of a Xiantian expert wasn't something a human could resist. And a battle on the level of 3 disasters was even more disastrous. If you got too close and got caught in the shockwaves, it would be difficult to not die. In front of the Blackwater army, Marquis Victorious Return was silently watching the battle. He didn't have the slightest intention of helping. This was a fair battle. He wouldn't interfere. A man stood next to Marquis Victorious Return, nervously clenching her fists. She wasn't an idiot. Naturally, she could see that this battle wasn't simple. "Good luck, good luck, good luck." A man was constantly cheering for Prince Yen. Ning Chen had taught her that when she couldn't help, cheering was also useful. Green and red breath at the same time. In the middle of the battle, the 2 swords flew into the sky. They were like rainbows as they transformed into streams of swords that rushed towards the martial monarch in front of them. It was a move that couldn't be dodged. It was the pinnacle of sword techniques. It was fast, accurate, and direct without any complicated changes. It was an ultimate move that sealed off all paths of retreat. The martial monarch focused. He didn't dare to be careless. The heavenly desolate halberd raised into the sky. His vast body drew upon the power of heaven and earth. The halberd light soared into the sky and collided with the streams of swords. In the shocking collision, the majority of the streams of swords turned invisible. But there was still a sword that quietly broke through the obstruction and passed through the martial monarch's body. The unrivaled martial monarch was forced back half a step. He was the first to be injured. The expert martial monarch wiped his hand and the bleeding stopped. For the first time since the start of the battle, he was completely focused. On the other side, Prince Yen calmly watched. He didn't take the opportunity to attack. This battle wouldn't end so quickly. At the beginning, it was only a test. In the Netherworld Underworld, Ning Chen stood at the entrance of the Netherworld Underworld. He looked towards the distant west with worry in his eyes. Although he had confidence in his senior, he couldn't help but worry. Normal people only had one chi. There would always be times when their true chi couldn't keep up. Especially when changing techniques, it was even more obvious. On the other hand, martial monarchs with two chi could heal as they fought. As long as it wasn't an irreversible injury, they were practically undying. That was also the main reason why martial monarchs were undefeatable. There were only two ways to defeat a martial monarch. The first was to use absolute strength to suppress the martial monarch so that his healing speed couldn't keep up with the speed of his injuries. The second was to destroy the threat of the dual chi-Cs. The first method didn't even need to be considered. In this world, there were people who could fight against martial monarchs, but there was no one who could completely suppress a martial monarch. Of course, if two experts above the three disaster realm joined hands, perhaps they could do it. But that was impossible. After all, in this world, there was only one person as shameless as the Golden Staff Imperial Teacher. So, the only feasible method was to destroy the threat of the dual chi-Cs. Chapter 175. In the west of the Great Xia, the Blackwater Army and the cavalry of the God sect were facing each other. The battle between the two armies had reached its climax. After the initial probing, both of them brought out their true strength. The clash of swords and halberds caused the sky to collapse and the earth to sink. Huge gullies appeared between the two of them. The powerful shockwaves caused everything around them to turn invisible. Broken stones filled the sky and scattered 3,000 feet away. This was a battle between true experts. It was fair and just. No one else could interfere. The martial lord's might was astonishing. The Sky Baron halberd was like a weapon that could destroy the world. Every time he waved it, a huge crack appeared in the sky. It was difficult to withstand this power. The Yen Prince raised the two swords in his hands as if they were light. One was fast, the other was slow. The fast one suppressed the enemy first, the slow one neutralized the enemy's power. The two swords worked together. Their attacks were fierce and their defense was tight. They were not at a disadvantage at all. The Yen Prince of the Great Xia is so capable, said a general of the God sect in shock. This person's sword seems to be able to predict the enemy's moves. He can always react before the martial lord makes a move. Unbelievable, said another general of the God sect in confusion. It's not that he can predict the enemy's moves. The third general of the God sect slowly shook his head and denied, it's accurate and very fast. The martial lord's moves have just started and the red sword has already attacked. The martial lord didn't have enough power and his moves were already weak. That's why it seems like the opponent has predicted the enemy's moves. The other two focused. After observing for a long time, they discovered that the truth was as the former said. They couldn't help but frown. This battle seemed to be much more difficult than they had imagined. Of course, none of the three generals thought the martial lord would lose because he had never lost before. That included when he faced the Sword of Sword City. The battle between the strongest was unimaginably fierce. The martial lord dominated the world with his unparalleled power. He could break 10,000 techniques with his power alone. The Sky Baron halberd was ferocious and had been stained with the blood of countless experts. The legend of the great Xia had cultivated for 27 years. He had formed his own way of the sword and looked down on the past and present. The red sword in the Yen prince's hand was like fire. It was astonishingly fast and left many wounds on the martial lord's body. However, the martial lord's recovery ability was unparalleled. No matter how fast the Yen prince's sword was, he could not break the legend of the martial lord's immortal body. 3 moves of the imperial sky, 9 evils breaking sun chop. Tian Huang held up the sky. Around the martial monarch, thousands of evil energies rose continuously. Black gas spread, and the world lost its color. The sun-breaking technique frightened ghosts and gods. Everyone was shocked, especially the Marquis of Triumph. His expression was extremely serious. That day, he had been injured by this very attack. The strength of a martial lord did not only lie in their undying body. Even in terms of absolute battle power, they were unparalleled in the world. Prince Yen quickly sheathed his green sword. He waved his hand and a beam of light darker than the night flew out. It swallowed everything, including the surrounding space. Abyss condensation. The expressions of the 3 generals changed greatly. The divine sect and the people of the world had been searching for the sealed sword for thousands of years. One sword forbids martial arts, no Tao under the heavens. The sword of seals, the forbidden technique. The abyss in Prince Yan's hand swallowed up the sky and earth. Black light spread out and destroyed everything. Extreme moves collided, causing a huge explosion. Heaven and earth once again suffered a calamity. Sand was thrown into disorder, and the earth was lifted up. The destruction was unbearable to look at. Pa! The sound of blood dripping could be heard. In the sand, 2 figures appeared. Blood quietly dripped from the corners of their mouths and dripped down to their feet, dyeing the earth red. The 2 were both injured. After one move, they were evenly matched. Prince Yan's eyes gradually turned cold. His figure flashed and he instantly appeared in front of the martial monarch. The speed of his red sword suddenly increased. One sword was fast, and the other was even faster. It was hard to keep up. The halberd in the martial monarch's hand met the sword. He was not afraid at all. If he could not win in terms of absolute speed, then he would use absolute power to break through. The martial monarch's tactic of not dodging caused the power of the legendary sword of the Xia dynasty to decrease by 30%. The advantage of the undying body was completely revealed. In the deadlock, it was hard to tell who had the upper hand. This was a battle between strength and speed. It was also a battle of patience. 3 disaster-level Xiantian experts had sufficient true qi and could use the power of heaven and earth. Unless there was an absolute suppression, it would be difficult to determine the winner in a short time. Between the 2 armies, more than 20 miles of land had already collapsed. There were huge gullies everywhere, and the ground was 3 feet deep. It was extremely terrifying. Beside Marquis Kaixien, a man's cultivation was limited. She could not see the situation of the battlefield clearly. She simply closed her eyes and silently said, "Senior, you can do it. Senior, you can do it." Although most of the soldiers in the 2 armies could not see the situation of the battle clearly, looking at the terrifying scene of the sky collapsing in front of them, each one was more shocked than the other. In the past, the battle between Marquis Kaixien and the martial monarch would try to avoid people as much as possible. Moreover, the battle would end very quickly. It was the first time for them to see a battle between 3 disaster-level Xiantian experts. It was hard to believe that this was not human strength, but divine power. It was no wonder that a barren city in the east could shake the world. It was no wonder that a broken temple in the southwest could become a Buddhist country. With such an expert here, not to mention 1,000 soldiers, even 10,000 horses would not be able to do anything. The sun rose in the west. In the blink of an eye, it was already noon. The battle between the two was white-hot. Prince Qin Huang's two swords, one attacking and one defending. The red sword's sharpness had already reached its peak. It was so fast that only a rainbow was left. It could no longer be seen by the naked eye. The martial monarch did not dodge. He was 70% attacking and 30% defending. The divine power was hard to block. The abyss-transforming divine power completely swallowed the abyss-transforming divine power. It became the biggest barrier for Prince Qin Huang to fight until now. Just as the sun was high in the sky, the martial monarch suddenly took a sword head-on. Immediately after, he pushed Prince Qin Huang back with a palm. He waved his halberd and condensed qi. The martial monarch's supreme martial art appeared again. 3 moves of the imperial sky, God destroying heaven. The peerless ominous weapon exploded with a power that surpassed the limits of the world. It was a move that could kill gods if gods blocked it. It was unstoppable. Facing the martial monarch's divine power, the red sword in Prince Qin Huang's hand and the abyss-condensing divine power all flew out. In the next moment, the sword frame began to tremble. The green sword soared into the sky. The 3 swords appeared together and revolved, forming a huge whirlpool. 3 swords in the sky, life and death contract. An endless rain of swords flew out of the whirlpool and crashed down. At the same time, the ominous weapons descended and collided violently. The strongest moves collided with the most shocking power. The ground within 20 miles collapsed with a loud rumble. Large chunks of earth were lifted up and collapsed, forming a terrifying scene of apocalypse. The soldiers of both armies were all frozen. They were completely stunned by this unimaginable scene. The martial monarch flew backward, and the legends were dyed red. In the violent aftermath, both of them were heavily injured. Up until now, the battle that seemed to be evenly matched finally started to tilt. As the two's true chi ran out, the martial monarch flipped his left hand and slapped out. The powerful palm force forced Prince Qin Huang in front of him. Dual sea of chi, alternating between attack and defense. At this moment, he displayed an absolute advantage. He changed his moves so quickly that it was unparalleled in the world. Prince Qin Huang forcefully raised his true chi and waved his hand. The sand sword flew out and turned into a sand waterfall in front of him. The power of the palm was shocking. With a bang, the sand waterfall dispersed and landed on Prince Qin Huang's body, bringing out a smear of red blood. The legend of the Great Xia was finally showing signs of defeat. What a pity. The 3 generals of the Eternal Night cult sighed. The legend of the Great Xia had already done enough. However, the martial monarch was still undefeatable. The outcome of this battle had already been decided. The next battle would be life and death. On the other side, the expression of the Marquis of Triumph's manner became abnormally heavy. Even the legend of the Great Xia was about to be defeated. Could it be that the martial monarch was truly undefeatable? No matter how delightful the battle is, there must be an end. Prince Qin Huang of the Great Xia, you have no regrets. In the battlefield, the martial monarch moved. He raised his halberd and lightning condensed. He wanted to end the legend of the Great Xia with one strike. Prince Qin Huang coughed out a mouthful of blood, but his expression was still as calm as before. With a move of his hand, the green and red swords flew over and his figure flashed. That day, before Ning Chen went into seclusion, he said many things. Among them, the most important thing was the possible way to break the dual sea of qi. Senior, the martial monarch's dual sea of qi is strong because he can quickly recover his qi when attacking and defending. He doesn't need to rest. When defending, he can also fight while recovering his injuries. However, that doesn't mean there is no solution. Everything has its advantages and disadvantages. The martial monarch has an extra sea of qi. At the same time he has the advantage of using his true qi, it also means he has an extra fatal flaw. No matter how strong his innate recovery ability is, after his sea of qi is broken, he cannot recover in a short period of time. Moreover, martial monarchs have always been used to fighting with dual sea of qi. Once one of them is broken, the martial monarch's attacks will be greatly affected and more flaws will appear. However, if you want to break one of the martial monarch's sea of qi, you must first find the location of the second sea of qi. Since the location of the first sea of qi is known by everyone, the martial monarch's protection towards that sea of qi must be the tightest. In other words, since no one knows the location of the second sea of qi, the martial monarch's protection towards it will be relatively weaker. On the other hand, since martial monarchs have the advantage of dual sea of qi, there is an 80–90% chance that they will have the same problem as the undying body. This is something I personally experienced after fighting with Underworld Child. Because I know that normal injuries won't have any effect, in battle, it will be unavoidable to use the body to take on some attacks. This is the advantage of the undying body, but it is also a weakness that can be exploited. Senior, you can feel the aura of the sword and your attacks are quick and accurate. There won't be the slightest difference. So, you are the person most likely to find the second sea of qi of the martial monarch. In battle, the more time passes, the more injuries there will be. This is a natural thing and no one will doubt it. To the martial monarch, his injuries will quickly recover, so he won't care. So, senior, you only need to remember where your sword has stabbed. After eliminating those places, it will be the location of the second sea of qi. That day, after hearing those words, Prince Yen could only remain silent. He sighed in his heart. The defeat of the abbot of the Du-Yi temple was not unjustified. That child's mind was truly terrifying. In the world, in the past 10,000 years, there had only been one time where someone in the postnatal realm fought against someone in the Three Disasters realm, the Battle of Wuxia Mountain. Looking at it now, the defeat of the Buddha in the mortal world was not unjustified. The words continuously reverberated in his ears. Prince Yan's gaze was like lightning as he looked at the sword wounds that had already completely recovered on the martial monarch's body. His two swords left his hands and quickly flew out. Azure and red breath simultaneously, one breath reckless. Chapter 176. The green and red swords intertwined, forming a bright rainbow light. They intersected and spiraled, directly attacking the only two acupoints on Wu Jun's body that had no sword marks. The two swords broke the acupoints. After this attack, Wu Jun's second Qi Si would finally appear in the world. The sword light followed, unavoidable and unavoidable. In the blink of an eye, it was already in front of him. Wu Jun ignored the green sword. Tian Huang slashed down, blocking the red sword with all his strength. In the next moment, the green sword passed through his body, bringing out a beautiful flower of blood. Clang! There was an ear-piercing collision. The moment the sword and halberd collided, the red sword flew away and the halberd trembled. Prince Yan's eyes suddenly became sharp. His body rushed forward, and the sand sword quickly condensed in his hand, turning into the thinnest sword in the world. The moment the halberd trembled and deviated, the sand sword brushed past Tian Huang's body and pierced 2 inches below Wu Jun's heart. Ugh! The sand sword entered his body. Wu Jun groaned and retreated half a step. Blood flowed out of his mouth. His undying body was finally broken. Ha! Wu Jun shouted. Enduring the pain in his heart, he flipped his left palm and forcefully counterattacked. With a loud bang, the two collided. Prince Yen was thrown back more than 10 feet. After landing, a trace of blood quietly slid down from the corner of his mouth. Ugh! On the other side, Wu Jun retreated 2 steps. The aura around his body was violently chaotic. His true qi surged, scattering in all directions from his destroyed qi si. For the first time since the battle started, he showed signs of defeat. In front of the two armies, the three generals and Marquis' triumphant return were startled. Soon after, as if they had thought of something, their expressions changed. Wu Jun was about to lose. The sand sword scattered, turning into a stream of light and entering the sword frame. Blood flowed out of Wu Jun's chest. It was extremely dazzling. The legend of the great Xia deserves his reputation. Come again. Wu Jun stepped forward and laughed heartily. His arrogance did not decrease, and his blood did not stop flowing. He raised his halberd and attracted lightning. His divine power shook the world. Prince Yen waited with full concentration. He did not let down his guard because he had destroyed Wu Jun's Qi. He had never thought that Wu Jun would lose so easily. There were 5 3-disaster realm experts in the world. Apart from the legend of the Eternal Night sect who had never appeared, Wu Jun was the undisputed number 1 of the remaining 4. To be able to sit at the top of the world, he could not just rely on his undying body. There were also Buddhas in the human world, but unfortunately, he was the weakest one. The green sword vibrated and flew back into Prince Yan's hand. The surrounding temperature suddenly dropped. At this moment, even the ground began to freeze. The white world spread and turned into a world of ice crystals. Heaven and earth were frozen, and all living things seemed to be dead. In the silent world, all sound had disappeared, and there was only the sound of swords and people. In the next moment, lightning descended from the 9 heavens, breaking this silent scene. The sea of lightning surged like the cries of 1,000 birds as it rapidly disintegrated the world of ice and snow. The halberd was blocked by the green sword. The ground beneath their feet sank by 3 feet and collapsed once again. The martial monarch's tyrannical move was world-shocking. The azure sword violently trembled, as if it was emitting a mournful cry. Hearing the sword aura, Prince Yan's expression changed slightly. His body flashed and he retreated 10 feet away. This battle ends here. With a wave of his hand, the green sword returned to its stand. The sword stand disappeared and fell in front of Ah Man, let's go. Prince Yan's figure flickered as he arrived before them and said calmly. Ah Man's eyes were wide open and filled with confusion. He didn't know what was going on. Within the battlefield, the martial monarch frowned, but he didn't stop them. Ah Man foolishly carried the sword stand and left. Marquis Kaishian and the martial monarch had no choice but to give the order to retreat. Senior, did you win? Asked the man curiously. No. Prince Yen shook his head. Ah, you lost? Man was a bit disappointed. You also didn't lose. Prince Yen shook his head once more. Then it was a draw? Asked the man with certainty this time. Prince Yen smiled. Not really. The battle just didn't end. Oh. Man was first startled, but then he understood. If they didn't want to fight, then so be it. Not fighting was the right thing to do. The two of them stayed in the Blackwater Army's camp for a short while before leaving on the same day. Marquis Kaishian asked for the reason and then didn't stay any longer. He watched them leave. Although this battle hadn't ended, at the very least they had confirmed the location of their second Dantian Sea of Qi. They still had hope of defeating the martial monarchs in the future. Senior, where are we going? Man walked a few steps before being pulled down. He then ran a few steps to catch up. The Confucian sect. Prince Yen walked in front. Why are we going to the Confucian sect? Man didn't know anything about the Confucian sect, but he still asked curiously. To replenish my sword, said Prince Yen calmly. The martial monarch truly was very strong. Furthermore, he still had a trump card he hadn't used. He didn't know whether or not he could win, but he knew that if they continued fighting, the azure sword would definitely break. The two swords were a pair of swords. If one was broken, the other would quickly lose its spirituality. Every sword was very important in a battle. If he deliberately didn't use the azure sword, it was almost impossible to defeat the martial monarch. Fortunately, he had completed the task Ning Chen had entrusted him with. A day later, Ning Chen walked out of the underworld and headed to the northern battlefield. Ning Chen's appearance in Marquis Bloodrobe's camp startled Marquis Bloodrobe, who was reading a secret report from a spy. The figure in front of him was so familiar. Other than that slightly pale face that hadn't seen the sun for a long time, everything else about him was the same as before. Marquis, long time no see, greeted Ning Chen with a light smile. As expected, you're still alive. Marquis Bloodrobe came back to his senses and sighed. Hearing from others and seeing with one's own eyes were two different things. Now that he saw Ning Chen in person, he finally believed this fact. After a simple greeting, the two of them brought the topic to the battle between Northern Meng and Great Xia. As Ning Chen listened to Marquis Bloodrobe's narration, his expression became more and more serious. The situation was far more troublesome than he had imagined. Originally, he had thought that when the wheat valleys in the north ripened, they would be able to force the Northern Meng army to the southeast of Great Xia. In the future, they would be able to use the advantage of the terrain to slow down the Northern Meng army's southward advance. Who would have thought that Fan Lingyue would see through it and turn the tables on Great Xia? Now that Northern Meng had charged out of the encirclement, they were unstoppable and left Great Xia in a sorry state. Ning Chen took 2 steps forward. Looking at the map, he was silent for a long time. It was already the middle of the 7th month. It should have been the time of the year when the rain was the heaviest. However, there wasn't much rain in the north of Great Xia this year. This also made it easier for Northern Meng to invade the south. Even the heavens weren't on Great Xia's side. It wouldn't be easy for Great Xia to turn the situation around. How far are we from Northern Meng? Ning Chen asked. A day and a half. However, with just my troops, I won't be able to stop the Northern Meng army, Marquis Bloodrobe replied. No matter how strong the Imperial Guards were, they wouldn't be able to stop the Northern Meng cavalry on the plains. The difference in mobility was too great. Let's speed up. Reinforcements should be arriving soon, Ning Chen slowly said. On the western battlefield, regardless of the outcome of the battle between the senior and the martial monarchs would be heavily injured. Without the martial monarchs, the threat of the Divine Sex army would be greatly reduced. With Marquis Kaixuan and the Blackwater army holding the fort, it would be enough to deter them. The reinforcements sent to the west could be changed to the north to reinforce the more urgent northern battlefield. The battle report from the west should have already reached Xiaomingri. Now, they just had to wait for the reinforcements from the west to arrive. What happened? Marquis Bloodrobe's expression was grave. Ning Chen simply told him about Prince Yan's journey to the west. The senior said that he needed to take care of some matters and would only be able to arrive in about a month. Calculating the time, it should be about time. Are you confident? Marquis Bloodrobe asked seriously. He wasn't familiar with Prince Yan and had only heard of some past events. However, the martial monarchs were truly the #1 expert in the world. It was hard to believe that Prince Yan had the strength to fight against a martial monarch. Yes, don't worry. Ning Chen nodded. Okay, I'll bet with you, Marquis Bloodrobe made a prompt decision. Right now, there was no other way. If they followed the prescribed order, the Great Xia would only be defeated step by step. It was better to take a gamble. If what Ning Chen said was true and reinforcements would arrive soon, then if they suddenly followed, they would be able to give the Northern Meng army a surprise. No matter how powerful that military advisor was, it was impossible for him to predict everything. The two of them carefully discussed the details. Marquis Bloodrobe was a general who had experienced hundreds of battles. His grasp of the details was not something that Ning Chen could compare to. Most of the time, Ning Chen listened to Marquis Bloodrobe. Only when he was certain that it wasn't appropriate would he say a few words and simply state his own thoughts. Every time this happened, Marquis Bloodrobed would think for a long time and carefully consider Ning Chen's suggestion. Most of Ning Chen's ideas were very unique and jumpy, giving Marquis Bloodrobed an indescribable feeling. It was very awkward, but when he thought about it carefully, it wasn't without reason. Although the tactical thinking of the two worlds was similar, there were still differences. Through Ning Chen and Marquis Bloodrobed, they constantly clashed that night. There was no such thing as a perfect tactic. As a result, the two of them spent most of the night discussing, constantly rejecting and being rejected. Seeing that it was getting late, Ning Chen glanced at the sky outside the tent and said, "As for Jingwu Duke, I'll leave it to you to send a message. I'll be leaving first." "You're not staying?" Marquis Bloodrobed asked. "Marquis, don't you know that I can't see the light of day?" Ning Chen pointed to the sky in the east and smiled. Marquis Bloodrobed was startled and then deeply sighed. How could he not know? That day, the entire world had seen it clearly. When he saw Ning Chen arrive, he thought that the matter had already been resolved. "Marquis, there's no need to be sad. Being able to survive is already a blessing for Ning Chen. I can't ask for too much." Ning Chen cupped his fists and bowed. "All right, I won't say any more goodbyes. Until we meet again." After Ning Chen left, Marquis Bloodrobed walked out of the tent. Looking at Ning Chen's gradually disappearing figure, he was silent. The favor that Grand Xia owed him could no longer be paid off. For the sake of Grand Xia, Jiming Marquis had given up his life, his emotions, his reputation, and everything else. Apart from the few people who knew the truth, the majority of Grand Xia's commoners viewed Jiming Marquis as an executioner and a symbol of evil. The commoners were ignorant, but they couldn't give up because of this. As marquises, they had to protect this country and its millions of commoners. There was no excuse. The glory of marquises was something that had been exchanged with the blood of their ancestors for 1,000 years. He, Marquis Triumphant Return, Marquis Jiming, and the other 7 marquises of this generation were walking down this path until death. Chapter 177. 7,000 miles northeast of Sword City, at the end of the world, an ordinary-looking man sat quietly. He looked at the sea of chaotic fog 30,000 feet below him, waiting silently. The man looked to be in his 30s. There was nothing special about him. He sat there motionlessly. He was Mu Bai, Desolate City's sword. He couldn't see anything beyond the end of the continent. Only when he looked down could he see the endless fog 30,000 feet below him. This was the appearance of the world. If Ning Chen was here, he would be shocked speechless. This world was completely different from the world in his mind. This world had an end. Mu Bai was waiting for the sea of chaotic fog to take shape. Once it took shape, it would be the best material in the world for refining weapons. Since swords in the human world were easy to break, he would find materials outside the human world to refine them. "Uncle." Mu Qingxue walked over and looked at the figure at the end of the world. "You shouldn't have come here. You still have unfinished business in the human world," said Mu Bai indifferently without turning around. "I've already repaid the favor that Desolate City owes me. Now, I have nothing to worry about," said Mu Qingxue. "You still have a favor to repay. Go back." As soon as he finished speaking, the wind and clouds changed. Sword Qi brought Mu Qingxue to the end of the world, only dissipating after he was 1,000 miles away. Forgetting doesn't mean you've seen through it. Your Tao is in the human world, not here. In the future, don't come back. The last words echoed between heaven and earth. Mu Qingxue's eyes flashed with confusion. Did she forget something important? If it was important, why would she forget? In the underworld, Ning Chen looked to the east in silence. He didn't move for a long time. Was she okay? He didn't know where the love came from, but it went deeper without any reason. When he found out, she had already forgotten. 2 hours later, the figure in the underworld disappeared. He sat on the ghost sedan chair and went south. Love always made people lose themselves. He still had things to do, so he couldn't be distracted. The ghost sedan chair went south in a flash. An hour later, it landed outside the imperial palace. Ning Chen put away the ghost sedan chair and walked toward the imperial palace. When the imperial army guards saw Ning Chen, they immediately stepped aside and bowed respectfully. Marquis. One figure after another followed Ning Chen's steps and knelt down until they reached the heavenly mandate palace. The dragon guards knelt before their Marquis. Their expressions were calm and respectful. In Great Xia, perhaps only the dragon guards in front of him had unwavering faith in their lord. Xia Mingri was still in the heavenly mandate palace. Just like Emperor Xia of old, he read memorials day and night. In the 1,000 years of Great Xia's history, other than Xia Rui, all the Xia emperors could be said to be wise emperors. This was undoubtedly a miracle. Before Xia Rui experienced the upheaval, he was also a diligent ruler. Unfortunately, he became a tyrant because of his jealousy and paranoia. Xia Mingri had only ascended the throne for a short period of time. So far, he had shown a good temperament. However, there were many monarchs who could share weal and woe together but not share riches and honor. No one knew whether Xia Mingri was such a person or not. Ning Chen did not care about these things. Among the 4 princes of the great Xia dynasty, apart from Xia Zi, the most talented one was actually the 3rd prince. However, talent did not necessarily mean that he was suitable for the position of Emperor Xia. Xia Yanwu was too confident. He was like Xia Rui in the past, always thinking that everything was in his hands. The only difference was that Xia Yanwu was stronger. Therefore, in the face of Fan Lingyue's solicitation, he would agree without hesitation. Xia Mingri was the exact opposite. Compared to the 3rd prince, Xia Mingri was more patient and cautious. Of course, he was forced by the situation at that time and had no choice. In the past, Xia Yanwu might have been a better candidate for Emperor Xia. However, now that the world was in chaos and Fan Lingyue was still alive, Xia Yanwu's arrogance would be a disaster for Great Xia. In the heavenly mandate palace, Ning Chen and Xia Mingri talked for a long time. The guards and eunuchs in front of the palace had all left. No one knew what they talked about. 4 hours later, Ning Chen left and went straight north. The ghost sedan drove for 700 miles. At the same time, a beautiful figure flashed past. Her clothes were whiter than snow. There was no trace of emotion on her perfect face. She was like a fairy from the 9 heavens. She was so extraordinary that no one dared to look at her directly. Mu Qingxue. After Ning Chen felt a familiar aura in front of him, he stopped the ghost sedan and made way. If this was just a chance encounter, he would pretend that he did not know. He was waiting for her to leave. Unfortunately, Mu Qingxue also stopped. Their eyes met. They looked through the curtains of the ghost sedan. The person who had once protected him had now become the most familiar stranger. Her indifferent eyes still did not have the slightest ripple. The scabbed wound in Ning Chen's heart was torn open again. Besides pain, there was only pain. "Miss, please make way." Ning Chen endured the pain in his heart and said. "Return the scroll of life and I will let you live." Mu Qingxue said lightly. "Impossible." Ning Chen refused without hesitation. He could give up the scroll of earth and the scroll of heaven. Only the scroll of life was absolutely impossible. If he returned it, then there would be nothing between them. After getting a negative answer, Mu Qingxue moved. He unsheathed the Chengying sword and turned into the fastest shadow in the world. In a flash, he was in front of the sedan. The 3-meter-long ghost sedan became the cruelest battlefield. The sword was merciless. The ink sword came out and blocked the Chengying sword with a clang. The two swords collided. The aftershock spread and the ghost sedan immediately scattered. Ning Chen retreated 3 steps, slightly at a disadvantage. Peak 9th grade. Mu Qingshue's eyes flashed with a strange light. The first time they met in Desolate City, the person in front of him was only a 6th grade Hotian realm cultivator. He didn't expect that in just half a year, he would reach the peak of the Heaven's Reach realm. "Miss, please make way." Ning Chen's expression was complicated. There was no reply. Only the sword light was like lightning. It was a person who had forgotten the past. The sword light was cold, emotionless. Ning Chen sighed and no longer said anything. The ink sword condensed into frost, the wind and snow opening the path to heaven. The exchange of swords was fast. Mu Qingshue's speed was unparalleled under the heavens. He was so fast that even his afterimages could not be seen. The ink sword in Ning Chen's hand was 90% offensive and 10% defensive. Apart from the sword light piercing towards his dantian, it did not care about anything else. Mu Qingshue's expression became even colder. His figure flashed and he appeared in the air. The Chengying sword rapidly spun and the mist in the sky condensed into sword qi, forming a beautiful pair of snow-white wings behind him. Sword leaving scars. In the blink of an eye, the beautiful figure in the air disappeared. The sword had left a scar and pierced through her body. Ugh! Ning Chen let out a muffled groan. Ignoring the pain in his chest, he grabbed the Chengying sword and slashed down. Mu Qingshue's figure rapidly retreated until he was 30 meters away. Looking at Ning Chen, his eyes narrowed. Undying body. You can't kill me. Ning Chen pulled out the Chengying sword from his chest. As he spoke, black blood dripped down from his chest and onto the ground. The vegetation around him quickly withered, losing all vitality. The Chengying sword trembled, resisting the blood on the sword, unwilling to yield. Ning Chen sighed inwardly. His left hand shook, dispersing the blood on the sword. Then he waved his hand and returned the sword. Mu Qingxue received the Chengying sword and frowned. For a moment, he hesitated. "Miss, if you want to take back the life-returning scroll, there's no need to rush. I consumed the Yellow Springs flower and won't be able to live for long. Desolate City has already waited for over 1,000 years. A few more months won't matter," said Ning Chen softly. "You know who I am." A cold light flashed through Mu Qingxue's eyes. "I was once the head of the Grand Court for a period of time. I was always able to find out things that ordinary people don't know. Miss, your surname is Mu, and the Zine Empire's imperial family is also surnamed Mu. More importantly, after the Zine Empire was destroyed, no one knew the whereabouts of the life-returning scroll. The Grand Xia searched for 1,000 years but still couldn't find it." Ning Chen raised his head and stared into Mu Qingxue's eyes. "If I'm not wrong, Miss and that senior in Desolate City should be the descendants of the Zine Empire's imperial family." Hearing that, killing intent rose in Mu Qingxue's eyes. His figure flashed and he instantly appeared in front of Ning Chen. Ning Chen let go of the sword between his fingers and took a few steps back. He said, "Miss, I'll say it again. You can't kill me. Besides, I'm not the only one who suspects or even knows about this matter. There's really no need to kill me to silence me." "What are you trying to say?" asked Mu Qingxue coldly. Ning Chen thought for a moment and said, "I want to make a deal with you." "What deal?" asked Mu Qingxue. "It's very simple. A life for a life. As long as you stay by my side, in the future, if there's a crisis, I hope you can help me once. In return, when the Yellow Springs poison flares up in a few months, you can kill me as easily as blowing off dust and take away the life scroll," suggested Ning Chen. Mu Qingxue didn't say anything. "Plus the Earth-returning scroll. Ning Chen released the aura of the earth-returning scroll. Mu Qingxue was tempted and hesitated. And the heaven-returning scroll. Ning Chen continued to tempt him. Deal. Mu Qingxue nodded and made a prompt decision. After the deal, Ning Chen's expression didn't change. He waved his hand to gather the ghost palanquin again and continued north. Where did you get so many heavenly tomes? Mu Qingxue asked the first question in his heart. Desolate City had only obtained one heaven-returning scroll in 1,000 years. And in this world, it was already difficult to obtain one heaven-returning scroll. Who would have thought that this young man would have 3? Ning Chen honestly said, the life-returning scroll was given to me by you, the earth-returning scroll was picked up by me, and the heaven-returning scroll was stolen from a tomb. Mu Qingxue frowned and said, I don't know you. We used to know each other, but you forgot, said Ning Chen slowly. Mu Qingxue closed his eyes, unwilling to speak. The corner of Ning Chen's mouth curled up into an almost undetectable smile. Being able to keep her by his side for these next few months was also good. If the poison really flared up in a few months, these 3 heavenly tomes would be useless to him. He might as well give them to her. He wanted to thank his senior for giving him 6 or 7 months of sober time. He wanted to live a long life, and he wanted to see Mu Qingxue while he was still alive. That was enough, truly enough. Chapter 178. In the northern Meng camp, an urgent secret letter was sent to the commander's tent. After reading it, Fan Lingyue's expression changed slightly. King Yen went west to challenge Martial Lord. Martial Lord was seriously injured, and the Divine Sect's heavy cavalry retreated 200 miles and did not come out. Fan Lingyue got up and came to the army's marching map. After carefully considering for a long time, just as he was about to give an order, he saw a familiar figure walk in. It's you. Long time no see. Looking at each other, the coldest killing intent was aroused. Fan Lingyue looked at the figure in front of him. After a short moment of surprise, he stretched out his slender hand, pressing forward. Ning Chen moved his feet, his sword fingers condensing frost, and similarly met the attack. There was no conversation, no hypocrisy, only cold killing intent. The 2 moves collided, and the aftermath spread out. The commander's tent could not withstand the scattered sword power and was torn apart. Neither of them showed mercy. Today was different from the past. With the opponent dead, this battle had no more variables. The chill on the sword fingers was bone-chilling, and the white light on the slender hand was even more ruthless. In the instant of the collision, the killing intent was brilliant. The big movement in the commander's tent attracted the attention of several generals in the army who were closest, and they quickly rushed over. Under the night sky in the distance, Mu Qingxue watched the battle without the slightest intention of going forward to help. Among the 7 generals who rushed over, 4 of them were above the 9th rank. Without saying anything, they immediately joined the battle. Ning Chen blocked 5 by himself, the cold light on his hand becoming sharper and sharper. Proud of his courage, he did not fall into a disadvantage. The silver light on his sword fingers was extremely bright. Among the 5, Fan Lingyue was the strongest, blocking most of the attacks. The other 4 supported with all their strength, cooperating well. For a time, they were in a stalemate. The movement of the battle was getting bigger and bigger. After the arrival of the 7 generals, another 9th-rank late-stage expert came to join the battle. 6 against 1, they killed the intruder. Facing 6 people, Ning Chen used his full strength for the first time. His sword moved without end, and sword chi wrapped around his fingers, blocking the 6 people's attacks. The fierce battle of the powerful heavens reach realm made the surrounding soldiers below the 9th rank not dare to take half a step closer, for fear of being involved and dying in vain. The battle became more and more intense, and the situation became more and more stalemate. Ning Chen's mind was highly focused, but there was always an indescribable sense of inconsistency. Fan Lingyue's performance was strong enough, but it was still not enough. The invincible white light of the past seemed to be much weaker today. Ning Chen could not afford to be distracted in a battle. He did not have time to think. He flipped his left hand, and his qi caused waves to surge. The sky and earth changed, and blue waves surged. He used the Zhangsun lineage's supreme art again. Waves shake the heavens and earth as one. Monstrous waves split the heavens and the earth, instantly sending the 5 rank, 9 powerhouses flying. Fan Lingyue hesitated for a moment, then moved his feet and retreated 100 feet, temporarily avoiding the attack. Ning Chen frowned. What was going on? With Fan Lingyue's strength, he shouldn't be so passive. At the thought of this, Ning Chen's figure flashed and charged forward. With his unparalleled foundation and immortal body, he forced the former to use his full strength. Fan Lingyue wasn't willing to meet him head-on. Half of his power was on the offensive and the other half was on the defensive. He was still as valiant as before, but he lacked the overwhelming boldness of the past. Cough, cough. After their palms collided, both of them retreated 30 feet back. Fan Lingyue was about to make another move when he suddenly staggered and coughed violently while covering his mouth. Ning Chen squinted his eyes and said coldly, "So your body's condition is much worse than I expected. However, only against you, I won't say anything about a fair fight." As he said this, Ning Chen once again charged forward. His fingertip condensed into frost, pressing forward. Just at this moment, a sharp halberd light appeared and chopped down. Ning Chen's eyes turned cold. His body tilted, and his sword fingers flipped over. With a clang, the halberd light was pushed aside. "Jiming Marquis, you dare to attack the northern Meng camp alone. Is it because you're confident or because you don't know your place?" Qin Wuyo walked out and stood between the two of them. The halberd in his hand was dazzling and filled with killing intent. Qin Wuyo. Ning Chen recognized him right away. This person should be the person with the most power and prestige in the northern Meng army apart from Fan Lingyue. Unfortunately, power and influence were not equal. He came at the right time. Seeing Qin Wuyo rush over, Fan Lingyue suppressed the pain in his body and walked forward. He calmly said, "Qin Wuyo, immediately take 30,000 light cavalry to delay the blood Marquis of Great Xia. Great Xia's reinforcements will arrive soon." "But, advisor, you." Qin Wuyo's expression was a little hesitant. "No buts. Go." Fan Lingyue coldly shouted. "Yes." Qin Wuyo accepted the order and immediately wanted to leave. "It's too late. Tonight, no one will be able to leave." Before he finished speaking, Ning Chen's figure had already disappeared. When he appeared again, he was already in front of Qin Wuyo. His sword pierced through the air, the cold light piercing to the bone. At the same time, Fan Lingyue also followed. A white light rose from her slender hand, extremely dazzling. Ning Chen flipped his left palm, and his palm met Fan Lingyue's. Immediately, he felt his true qi drain away, and he had no more strength left. A strange technique appeared once again. Ning Chen immediately retracted his true qi and retreated 10 feet. "Go." Fan Lingyue coldly said. Qin Wuyo did not dare to delay and quickly left. "Do you think you can leave?" Ning Chen coldly snorted and took out the Deathbreaker bow. In the bright silver light, 3 arrows pierced through the air. The 3 terrifying arrows chased after the stars and the moon, surpassing the limits of space. In the blink of an eye, they arrived in front of Qin Wuyo. In the next moment, blood splattered everywhere. Qin Wuyo blocked the first 2 arrows, but he could not block the third. In an instant, he was heavily injured. "You're the one courting death." Seeing her subordinates injured one after another, anger flashed through Fan Lingyue's eyes. Her black hair danced, and the white light around her flourished. She raised her technique to the peak. Ning Chen did not dare to be careless. Facing an opponent who had finally used her full strength, he raised his hand and pointed, and the sword reflected the 9 heavens and the moon. 10,000-li raging waves split, 10,000-li raging waves surged and roared. In the rolling waves, a sword split the sky and slashed down with a loud bang. Fan Lingyue was not afraid at all. He raised the raging waves with a single palm. In the brilliant white light, the sword intent of split the sky turned invisible and disappeared. The moment Ning Chen recovered his chi, Fan Lingyue's figure flashed. He flipped his palm and black blood dyed the sky. Just like the first time they fought, this was an unbelievably strong opponent. Blood dripped from the corner of Ning Chen's mouth. His expression was grave. He did not believe that there was an absolutely invincible technique in this world. Even the undying body had flaws, let alone a technique that was cultivated after birth. Fury of the 9 heavens. In order to test the limits of Fan Lingyue's technique, Ning Chen once again activated his true chi. With a flip of his palm, blue waves covered the sky and earth. A divine waterfall fell from the sky with a loud bang. Stupid! Fan Lingyue stretched out his right hand. The fury of the 9 heavens dissipated. In the next moment, a vast palm pressed down and blood splattered 3 feet away. The angry Fan Lingyue was like a goddess of war from the heavens. Divine light covered her body and her pair of white hands were invincible. She was so powerful that she was invincible. The northern Meng soldiers in the distance were shocked to see the military advisor who had always been known for his wisdom display such a terrifying strength. The military advisor's martial arts was no longer a secret, but no one expected him to be so powerful. Even an innate stage expert would not be so powerful. Ning Chen's chest felt heavy and he vomited a mouthful of blood. He barely managed to stabilize his body. His expression did not change at all. He still believed that a perfect technique did not exist. It was just that he had not found a way to deal with it. In the distance, Mu Qingxue looked at the white light on Fan Lingyue's body and narrowed her eyes. She also did not know what technique this was to have such an absolutely invincible power. The situation of the battle changed so quickly. Fan Lingyue, who was still a little clumsy a moment ago, no longer cared about her body. She used all her strength and immediately displayed an overwhelming and terrifying strength. They were all at the peak of the 9th grade. In the past, there was the unshakable Son of God. Later, there was Xia Zi, Mu Qiansheng and other outstanding geniuses. Ning Chen, who was the slowest, had also fought against innate stage experts and Buddha in the mortal world. There was no doubt that his strength was not inferior to any of the geniuses of the younger generation. Especially after coming out of seclusion this time, his cultivation had reached the peak of the 9th grade and his strength had increased greatly. However, when facing Fan Lingyue, who was also at the peak of the heavens reach realm, he was still in such a sorry state. There was no perfect person in the world, but there was Fan Lingyue. If not for her illness, no one could imagine how terrifying this woman would be. Ning Chen stretched out his hand and pulled out his ink sword. His figure flashed and his sword broke out. Since true chi was useless, he could only rely on his moves to win. The ink sword swung and frost fell from the sky. The sword in Ning Chen's hand moved faster and faster. When facing an invincible opponent, he tried his best to find a flaw. Fan Lingyue dealt with all changes by remaining unchanged. When the sword entered the white light, its speed immediately decreased by 70% and its strength by 30%. It no longer had the power to kill the enemy. Her delicate hand shook the ink sword, causing a waterfall of water to splash. This was the frost melting and could not exist in the lustrous white light. Sword light, white light, the battle was chaotic. Ning Chen used his sword as the main force and his aura as support, barely managing to fight. Fan Lingyue's mouth was bleeding. It was not an injury from the battle, but an outbreak of illness. Concerned about the situation of the battle, Fan Lingyue endured her illness and raised her strength again. The white light became even brighter, as if a second moon had risen and illuminated the world. Scroll of the Moon, Silent Moonfall. The Scroll of the Moon technique reappeared in the world. Instantly, wherever the moonlight shone, everything became silent and still. Seeing the heavenly book technique for the first time, Ning Chen was even more shocked. He was shocked that Fan Lingyue could use the Scroll of the Moon technique. He was shocked that his body could no longer move. He could not even circulate his true qi. The next moment, Fan Lingyue arrived in front of him. Her powerful palm force destroyed all of Ning Chen's heart meridians. Ugh! Ning Chen flew out, the blood in his mouth spilling onto the ground. He was extremely miserable. However, a shocking scene occurred. Ning Chen, who was supposed to be dead, staggered back to his feet. Undying body. Fan Lingyue narrowed her eyes and said slowly. Surprised? Ning Chen spat out a mouthful of blood and said sarcastically. Fan Lingyue snorted and said, so what if you have an undying body? I don't believe that you won't die. After saying that, Fan Lingyue waved her hand. Not long after, under the commander's tent that had turned into ruins, a sword with an ancient aura flew over. The sword was not out of its scabbard, but it already gave people an extremely strong pressure. Pure karma beginning. Far away, Mu Qingshue's expression changed as he said in shock. Fan Lingyue slowly pulled out the ancient sword from the scabbard. Immediately, the weather changed. An ancient aura appeared, shocking the world. Chapter 179. The night wind blew and her blue dress danced in the wind. Fan Lingyue held the hilt of the Jingye Absolute Beginning sword and slowly pulled it out. Seeing that the unknown ancient sword was about to be unsheathed, Ning Chen's feet moved and he instantly closed in. The black sword pierced forward, threatening to kill. Clang! With a vibration, Fan Lingyue turned her hand and condensed her qi. White light gathered and blocked the black sword. The Absolute Beginning sword was unsheathed and appeared for the first time in 1,000 years. Immediately, Endless sword might spread and sent the figure in front flying. After 10 feet, Ning Chen landed on the ground and stopped in a sorry state. He looked at the ancient sword in Fan Lingyue's hand with a serious expression. This sword had been nurtured for an unknown number of years. The sword intent hidden inside was truly shocking. However, the most terrifying thing was the power of the sword itself. Even he, who had an undying body, felt a bone-chilling coldness. Tonight, knowing your destiny but not your destiny, returning to the Yellow Springs. With the sword in her hand, Fan Lingyue's entire temperament changed. The wise and calm military advisor disappeared and was replaced by a death god full of killing intent. White light protected her entire body and nothing could break it. With the Jingye Absolute Beginning in her hand, there was nothing she couldn't overcome. Facing the strongest opponent in his life, Ning Chen's expression was unprecedentedly serious. He took a step forward and the cold snow around him surged. In that instant, the swords crossed each other. One was strong, and the other was even stronger. Under this bloody night sky, another martial art was unleashed. At this moment, the military advisor of Bei Meng displayed not only the wisdom of the world, but also the strength that shocked the world. Ning Chen fought bitterly and the injuries on his body became more and more serious. His undying body actually showed signs of collapsing. In the distant night sky, the light in Mu Qingshue's eyes kept jumping. No one knew the origin of the Jingye Absolute Beginning. However, this sword could purify some negative karma and inauspiciousness. It had a strong restraining effect on Ning Chen's fake undying body. More and more blood flowed from the corner of Fan Lingyue's mouth. Forcefully exerting all of her strength undoubtedly put a huge burden on her body. Specks of blood floated on her blue dress, like scarlet flowers blooming in the blue sky. This was a stalemate. Apart from the two of them, no one knew whether Fan Lingyue's body couldn't take it or Ning Chen's undying body collapsed first. The two of them had already unleashed their strength to the peak. Sword chi danced in the air, forming a vacuum that no one dared to approach. There was no doubt about Ning Chen's strength. If it wasn't for Lingyue, he could definitely be called the strongest person below the innate stage. However, Fan Lingyue's strength had already far exceeded the limits of the Heaven's Reach realm, powerful to the point of being hard to believe. Absolute suppression, there was no chance. Facing the absolute beginning and the pure white body protecting divine light, the faster Ning Chen's sword was, the faster his true power would be consumed, and the more injuries he would have. He couldn't break through the protective divine light and couldn't defend against Jingye Taichu. In the past, even when Ning Chen faced the Buddha in the mortal world, he wasn't in such a sorry state. The night was getting darker, and the bright moon was moving westward. More and more people were watching the battle. Si Ming Jian had been standing there for a long time, waiting for the moment to attack. Suddenly, the ink sword flashed past and broke through the white light for the first time. Fan Lingyue's left shoulder was injured and he took 3 steps back. This sudden change not only stunned the surrounding Northern Meng soldiers, but also Ning Chen himself. He didn't know what was going on. In the next moment, Ning Chen came back to his senses. The black sword condensed into frost and went in another inch. Stand down. Fan Lingyue endured the pain in his left shoulder and forcefully raised his martial arts, pushing the former away with a palm. Ning Chen flew a dozen steps back and stabilized his body. He condensed his martial arts, and as the frost surged, his sword swept out and once again stabbed towards the flaw in the protective divine light. Foolish beyond compare. Fan Lingyue sneered, and the white light around his body shone brightly. The moment the ink sword was about to reach him, his delicate hand condensed chi and blocked the front. The swift and fierce sword actually couldn't move an inch. Ning Chen was stunned. In that short moment, Jingye Taichu flashed past and blood spurted out. How can this be? Ning Chen staggered and retreated 7 or 8 steps. He vomited blood, and his face was full of disbelief. Are you surprised? Fan Lingyue walked over step by step and said coldly, you only have one chance of good luck. Unfortunately, you didn't grab it. Why? Ning Chen supported himself with his sword and said with difficulty. He was very sure that the position just now was the flaw in the protective divine light. Why did it disappear for no reason? Someone will tell you in the netherworld. Fan Lingyue stopped, and the white light of Jingye Taichu in his hand flourished as he slashed down. At this moment, the 4 marked swords that had been waiting for an opportunity also condensed chi and rushed over. At the critical moment, Ning Chen forcefully raised his body and pushed the life scroll to its peak. The first snow fell from the sky and danced in the wind. Emotions when it's almost snowing, snow in July drifts. In the blink of an eye, sword light bloomed in the wind and snow. Every snowflake carried an extremely swift and fierce sword intent. It was unavoidable and unblockable. The 4 marked swords in front of Fang Ji were affected by the wind and snow and were immediately dyed with blood. Fan Lingyue's expression changed slightly. He waved his hand and white light filled the sky, scattering the incoming snowflakes. In that short moment, Ning Chen's feet moved and he quickly retreated. Fan Lingyue was about to give chase when he suddenly staggered and vomited a mouthful of blood. The illness that he had suppressed for a long time erupted, and he could no longer suppress it. In the ghost palanquin, Ning Chen also vomited a mouthful of blood, his face pale. What a good Fan Lingyue! He was really invincible. What a miserable defeat! Mu Qingxue said indifferently. Ha! Ning Chen closed his eyes tiredly. He had nothing to say about his defeat. He was completely suppressed and had no power to fight back. Did you find an opening? Mu Qingxue asked. No. Ning Chen shook his head and said hoarsely, I originally found it, but it disappeared for some reason. Let me tell you something you don't know. Fan Lingyue has a chaos volume. Mu Qingxue thought for a moment and reminded him. Chaos volume. Ning Chen opened his eyes and a light flashed through them. Perhaps the problem with the chaos volume in the heavenly book came from this. Fan Lingyue was able to perfectly conceal his martial aura before. That should be the effect of the chaos volume. As for whether or not the strange scene today was due to the chaos volume, he wasn't too sure. That terrifying white light was both offensive and defensive. If one couldn't find an opening, it was practically an invincible battle technique. Ugh! Suddenly, Ning Chen let out a pained groan. The evil aura around his body surged, and the underworld spring in his dantian released a powerful evil aura that quickly spread. After a long battle and being exhausted, the underworld spring erupted, wanting to devour his entire dantian. The situation that Prince Yen had spoken of had finally appeared, but it came at such an inopportune time. Mu Qingxue frowned and waited for Ning Chen to speak. Once this life-saving opportunity was used up, she would have fulfilled her promise. Ning Chen endured the pain in his dantian and took out 2 golden pills. In an instant, Buddhist light dazzled and Buddhist chanting could be faintly heard. Heavenly Buddha pill. Mu Qingxue narrowed his eyes. Ning Chen didn't use this life-saving opportunity. Instead, he swallowed the 2 pills and forcibly expelled the evil aura from his body. Buddhism and Buddhism were natural opposites. The evil aura and Buddhist energy violently collided within his body. The evil aura of the underworld spring was abnormally powerful. Although it was less than 1/10 of its original power, it won in terms of purity. The 2 heavenly Buddha pills were released at the same time, barely managing to resist the underworld spring's power. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Ning Chen forcefully circulated the remaining true qi in his body. The power of the 3 heavenly books and the Zhangsun bloodline's true qi erupted at the same time, forcing out the underworld spring. You really have a lot of things in your body, said Mu Qingxue calmly as he glanced at the overbearing underworld spring. In order to live, I have to try many things. Ning Chen waved his hand and put away the underworld spring. He smiled tiredly. Was the ghost girl reliable or not? She didn't tell him that the underworld spring would have side effects. Fortunately, he could still distinguish between those who wanted to help him and those who wanted to harm him. Otherwise, he would have definitely gone over and destroyed the stone room she was in. When the ghost palanquin returned to the underworld, it was already close to daybreak. Mu Qingxue looked at this strange place and walked around. So this was the legendary underworld. A few months wasn't a long time for a Xiantian. She would wait for him for a few months to take back the life scroll that belonged to Desolate City. As for the earth and heaven scrolls, they could be considered as interest. Northern Meng's camp was a mess after the battle. The place where the 2 had fought was now a wasteland. The only thing that could still be seen were the terrifying sword scars. Fan Lingyue sheathed his sword and his powerful aura disappeared. Enduring his injuries, he ordered, Wuxia, you and General Bai Li immediately take 40,000 light cavalry to stop Marquis Bloodrobe's army. Yes. The 2 generals accepted the order and quickly left. Ing Xiaoyuan, Yuan Fei, Kong Ping, informed the army to immediately set off at daybreak, continued Fan Lingyue. Yes. Another 3 generals walked out and accepted the order. The rest of you, go back and prepare yourselves, said Fan Lingyue. Yes. The remaining 5 generals bowed respectfully and quickly returned to the camp. PFFF, after everyone left, Fan Lingyue once again spat out a mouthful of blood. He staggered and almost fell down. When they met again, he was even stronger than before. Now in Northern Meng's camp, except for her, no one was his opponent. In just a short year, the young man of the past had become a big threat today. In the netherworld underworld, Ning Chen's expression was also abnormally grave. He had already tried his best to delay, but he didn't know if Marquis Blood-Robed could grasp the opportunity. Fan Lingyue's strength was beyond expectations. In addition to the white light protecting his body, there was also the Moon Scroll's move. Every heavenly scroll's move had to be at the Xiantian level to cultivate. The Earth Scroll was like this, the Heaven Scroll was like this, and the Moon Scroll was no exception. However, Fan Lingyue's cultivation was undoubtedly still below the Xiantian level. At this time, there was no longer any need to hide. If Fan Lingyue was at the Xiantian level, he wouldn't have been able to return tonight. The Heavenly Scroll's move was truly terrifying. At that moment, he couldn't move or resist. He was completely waiting for death. If not for his immortal body, that palm would have already killed him. However, there was one thing he could be sure of. Fan Lingyue could only use the Moon Scroll's move once in a short period of time. Otherwise, with the addition of the pure beginning that Mu Qingxue spoke of, even if he had an immortal body, he would still be deader than dead. Ning Chen closed his eyes and stood in the netherworld underworld in contemplation. He couldn't find a flaw. It was truly a battle that made people despair. He still couldn't understand why the flaw in the white light had disappeared. Also, what other use did the Chaos Scroll have besides hiding one's aura? Also, was the disappearance of the flaw related to the Chaos Scroll? In the distance, Mu Qingxue looked at the silent figure in front of him. His eyes flashed. Did she really know him in the past? Chapter 180. In the Netherworld Kingdom, Ghost Woman's seclusion room was emitting ghost chi that was growing stronger by the day. It could be seen that Ghost Woman was not far from the Xiantian realm and could step into it at any time. If nothing unexpected happened, Ghost Woman would be the next person to step into the Xiantian realm. Originally, this person should have been Xia Zi. Unfortunately, he was shot down from the Xiantian realm by Ning Chen's arrow that night. In this world, there were countless geniuses, but there were still a few special people who looked down on the world, far surpassing them. Underworld Child, Ghost Woman, Xia Zi, God's Child, etc. The Netherworld Kingdom had been in decline for a long time. In this generation, only Underworld Child and Ghost Woman were still awake. Underworld Child was an anomaly in the Netherworld Kingdom. His temperament was hard to predict, so the only true successor of the Netherworld Kingdom was Ghost Woman. The ghost chi in the stone room continued to spread. Under the red veil, Ghost Woman's mouth was bleeding. The more anxious she was to break through to the Xiantian realm, the more difficult it was for her to take that crucial step. Within the Netherworld Kingdom, Mu Qingxue felt the powerful ghost chi. His figure flashed and he arrived outside the stone room. Just as he was about to approach, he saw the Zhiga sword move and sword intent spread out. Mu Qingxue's expression turned cold. He immediately retreated 30 meters and unsheathed the Chengying sword, blocking the sword intent. The Zhiga sword blocked and protected the stone room behind the sword. Even a Xiantian expert would find it difficult to take half a step forward. Mu Qingxue narrowed his eyes and turned to leave. At the entrance of the Netherworld Kingdom, Ning Chen stood quietly. Seeing Mu Qingxue walk over, he smiled and said, "What's wrong? Are you not used to it?" "The person in the stone room is in danger," Mu Qingxue said calmly. Ning Chen turned around with a surprised expression. Just as he was about to speak, he felt the chaotic aura in the depths of the Netherworld Kingdom. His expression changed and he quickly disappeared. Mu Qingxue thought for a moment and followed him. Ning Chen appeared in front of the stone room. He didn't dare to delay and immediately pushed open the door and charged in. The Zhiga sword was calm and didn't have any reaction. Mu Qingxue's eyes flashed. He tried to take a step forward, but he felt the sword intent appear again. It was as heavy as a mountain, difficult to approach. The Great Xia Kingdom's Legend. Mu Qingxue looked at the sword in front of the stone room and praised in his heart. When Prince Yan and Ning Chen went to Desolation City together, they used this sword. Now, it seemed that Prince Yan's true strength was not inferior to any three-disaster realm expert. Inside the stone chamber, Ghost Girl's blood qi was surging. The chaotic aura spread out and filled the entire stone chamber. Ning Chen rushed in and activated the life scroll. His sword finger condensed into frost and pointed at the Ghost Girl's qi si. His vast aura poured into the Ghost Girl's qi si, suppressing the surging Zhen qi in her body. Outside the stone room, Mu Qingxue waved his hand. The shadow-bearing sword was unsheathed. Holding it in his slender hand, he rushed forward. Clang! The Zhiga sword moved, and the sword intent spread out. The Qingying sword was only 3 feet away when it was shaken out. Mu Qingxue was not affected at all. He took a step in the air, turned around, and slashed out with his sword. With a king sound, the two swords clashed for the first time. The Zhiga sword hummed softly, its sword intent flourishing, completely erupting. Bang! Mu Qingxue flew out. After landing on the ground, his figure flickered a few times before he charged forward again. His white robe fluttered, and he was as fast as a flash of light. With one sword strike, he disappeared immediately. When he reappeared, the sword light had yet to fall, and he was gone again. The Zhiga sword was as immovable as a mountain. Its sword intent spread out in circles, blocking the intruder. At the same time, inside the stone chamber, Ning Chen activated the life scroll with all his might. Amidst the wind and snow, all of his power was poured into the Ghost Girl's body. Eh! The Ghost Girl let out a long painful groan. Her red wedding dress shook. Suddenly, the red veil flew up, revealing a seductive face. In that instant, the Ghost Girl opened her eyes. Her eyes were filled with panic. She subconsciously sent out a palm strike, and with a bang, the person in front of her was shaken out. Ning Chen did not react in time. Without any preparation, he flew out of the stone chamber and landed on the ground. He vomited a mouthful of blood. The stone chamber closed. The Ghost Girl came back to her senses for a moment, and then closed her consciousness again. Cough cough, Ning Chen's Zhen qi was severely depleted. His qi was exhausted, and he was hit by the Ghost Girl's full-power palm strike. For a moment, even standing up was difficult for him. Mu Qingxue stopped. Looking at Ning Chen in front of him, he frowned. He reached out to pick him up and left. If I killed you right now, wouldn't it be as easy as blowing off dust? Mu Qingxue indifferently asked. Taking advantage of someone's perilous state is not the conduct of a gentleman. Ning Chen coughed up a mouthful of blood. Talking about a gentleman's conduct with a woman is incomparably stupid. Mu Qingxue sneered. Ning Chen was startled. He felt that this sentence was somewhat familiar, as if someone had said something like this in the past. If you kill me right now, you won't be able to obtain the earth and heaven scrolls. It's not appropriate. Mu Qingxue thoughtfully nodded. That makes sense. Ning Chen tiredly smiled. She was still the same as before, cold on the outside but warm on the inside. She was far from being as unreasonable as she seemed. In the north of the Grand Xia, the northern Meng army was rapidly moving south. They were doing everything they could to cross the North River before the western reinforcements arrived. The North River was the longest river in the north of the Grand Xia. However, there hadn't been much rain this year, so many parts of the river had already dried up. The Marquis of the blood-clad Marquis led 80,000 imperial guards to chase after them day and night. They were already very close to the northern Meng army. Half a day later, 40,000 cavalrymen blocked the path and blocked the advance of the imperial guards. The two armies fought from noon to sunset. Nearly half of the 40,000 cavalrymen were lost, and they blocked the Marquis of the blood-clad Marquis' army for half a day. The next morning, when the northern Ming army was about to cross the bridge, the Marquis of the blood-clad Marquis broke through the blockade and chased after them. Fan Lingyue immediately gave the order to send 1,000 cavalrymen and 10,000 soldiers to cover the rear. The army quickly crossed the bridge and headed south. The 20,000 cavalrymen left on the other side of the North River immediately changed their route and headed west to avoid the Imperial Guards. They were prepared to cross the river from another place. In the end, the western reinforcements were still a step too late. They weren't able to stop the northern Ming army before they crossed the river. However, although the northern Ming army crossed the river, their losses weren't small. Close to 20,000 cavalrymen died in battle. The 1,000 cavalrymen and 10,000 soldiers covering the rear also suffered heavy casualties. They were almost completely wiped out. On the Great Xia side, the Marquis of the blood-clad Marquis and the 80,000 Imperial Guards came prepared. However, facing the charge of the northern Ming cavalry and the stubborn resistance of the soldiers covering the rear, they still suffered heavy casualties. 25,000 Imperial Guards died in battle and would forever remain on the North River. A day later, the North Ming army changed their route and took down Yangguan City at lightning speed. They rested for a while. Pretty much at the same time, the western reinforcements arrived. 100,000 troops arrived and rushed toward Yangguan City. The 55,000 Imperial Guards under the Marquis of the blood-clad Marquis also rushed toward Yangguan City. That night, Ning Chen came out once more and came to the Marquis of the blood-clad Marquis camp to discuss the war matters. Yangguan City still had 60,000 iron cavalry, 70,000 infantry, and close to 10,000 heavy cavalry. However, the 20,000 iron cavalry on the other side of the North River would arrive soon. The situation was still not good for them. More importantly, the ones defending the city were the northern Ming army. Although Yangguan City wasn't an iron city like Yangui City and Yeyang City, the price they had to pay to take it down was still not something they could bear. The Marquis of the blood-clad Marquis and Ning Chen discussed for most of the night but still couldn't come up with a good plan. Fan Lingyue's decisiveness was indeed extraordinary. He was able to quickly change the situation and regain the initiative in such a disadvantageous situation. Especially the 20,000 northern Ming cavalrymen who were left outside. The number was neither more nor less, but it was like a thorn in their throat. It made them very uncomfortable and could become the key to the victory at any time. How long until Jingwu Duke's army arrives? Ning Chen asked solemnly. For days, the Marquis of the blood-clad Marquis replied. Ning Chen pondered. For days was not a long time. He hoped that there wouldn't be any accidents. Before dawn, Ning Chen left and returned to the underworld. In the underworld, Mu Qingxue was still competing with the Zhiga sword in front of the stone room. They had been fighting for a whole night and there was no sign of stopping. Ning Chen had something on his mind. He stood aside absent-mindedly and kept thinking about the war between the two armies. This time, they made the northern Ming suffer because they were unprepared. However, the northern Ming army still crossed the river. It was a bit difficult to deal with them. On the other side of the North River, the remaining 20,000 cavalrymen were like a ticking time bomb. They were too dangerous and needed to be eliminated quickly. However, since ancient times, the light cavalry was the most mobile soldier type in the cold weapons era. To eliminate them was not easy. In the past, China was harassed by the nomads in the north. In China's history, the Yuan dynasty, which had the most land, was taken down by the Mongol cavalrymen using their scimitars and bows. The combat strength of the northern Ming imperial court's light cavalry was not any weaker than the Mongol cavalry of that time. In terms of military discipline, their combat quality was rarely seen since ancient times. Furthermore, this was a world where martial arts experts existed. With the cover of the Beimeng light cavalry and martial arts experts, they were invincible. Apart from the Great Xia Guard's Legion Corps, it would be hard for any other army to block them. Ning Chen thought for a long time but could not find a solution. He helplessly looked at Mu Qingxue, who was still competing with the Zhiga sword, and said, "Miss Mu, I have a question for you." "Speak." Mu Qingxue's body flashed, and his sword stabbed at the tip of the Zhiga sword. With a pang, the earth on the Zhiga sword exploded, and a dark yellow light rose up. In the surrounding space, the gravity suddenly increased. Mu Qingxue only felt the Qingying sword in his hand sink, and before he could react, he was once again sent flying by the sword intent. "Why don't you listen to me first? Anyways, there are still a few months, and you have plenty of time to compete with this sword," Ning Chen seriously suggested. Mu Qingxue sheathed his sword and said expressionlessly, "Speak. If you act, how confident are you in killing Fan Lingyue?" Ning Chen asked curiously. Mu Qingxue looked at the former with a weird expression, and a look of disdain flashed across his eyes, 50%. "However, if this is your request, I advise you to give up. I only promised to save you once, and I did not promise to help you kill someone. Kiki, I'm just asking out of curiosity." Ning Chen rubbed his nose and laughed. A 50% chance was not high. Ning Chen's mind spun, and he temporarily suppressed this thought. If even Mu Qingxue only had a 50% chance, then that meant that as long as it was not a 3-disaster expert, no one would have the confidence to kill Fan Lingyue. This war had already reached the most crucial moment, and if he could kill Fan Lingyue, that would be the best solution. However, he could not place all his hopes on that. At this moment, he had to think of a way to prevent the northern Meng forces from gathering outside Yangguan City. If Jingwu Duke could arrive in time, Great Xia could still fight this war. You're tuning into the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.